Section 1. The nuclear power plant is poisoning Springfield. Go ahead and get comfortable right now. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let your jaw go loose. Let your hands settle wherever they naturally fall. You do not need to follow every word tonight. You do not need to hold on to every detail or remember every theory. This is not a test. Nothing will be asked of you. The only thing required of you for the next several hours is to let yourself breathe and let the words wash over you, the way a river washes over stones that have been lying in the same position for a very long time. We are going to spend a long, slow, quiet night in Springfield. Not the Springfield of water cooler conversation, not the Springfield of highlight reels and viral clips, and the 6-second moments that escape into the wider culture and live there forever. We are going to spend time with Springfield the way you spend time with a place you have known your whole life. And then one day you stop walking past it and you actually stand in front of it and you look at it carefully and you realize it has been trying to tell you something for years that you were always just slightly too distracted to hear. The Simpsons has been on the air since the 17th of December, 1989. Let that date sit for a moment. The 17th of December, 1989. 36 years. 36 full rotations of the Earth around the Sun since Bart Simpson first appeared on a television screen and told the watching world to eat his shorts. Since Homer first stumbled through a front door and collapsed on the couch. Since Marge first smoothed her apron and turned from the kitchen counter with that particular expression, she has perfected across nearly 4 decades of fictional marriage, patience, and worry, and love, all held in one face at the same time. 36 seasons, nearly 800 episodes. The longest-running American animated series in the history of the medium. The longest-running sitcom, full stop, of any kind. The longest-running scripted primetime program ever put on American television. There has never been anything remotely like The Simpsons in terms of longevity, cultural penetration, or the sheer volume of human attention it has absorbed and held across the generations of its audience. And in all that time, across every single episode, through every couch gag and every guest appearance and every Springfield mob riot and every moment Homer fell down the stairs or off a cliff or out of a plane and somehow walked away from it. Through 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes and an uncountable number of hours of content, nobody in Springfield has aged a single day. Bart Simpson is still 10 years old. He has been 10 years old since the morning the show began, and he will be 10 years old if the show runs for another 36 years. Lisa is still 8. Maggie is still 1. Homer still gets in his car every morning and drives to the same nuclear power plant to perform the same incompetent safety inspector duties for the same ancient, inexplicably immortal billionaire who still cannot remember his name despite decades of continuous employment. Marge is still standing in the same kitchen. The house on Evergreen Terrace looks the same. The Quickie Mart has the same fluorescent lights. The power plant's cooling towers still stand against the same sky. And not a single person in Springfield, not one character, not one background resident, not one person in any crowd scene or any town meeting or any riot or any parade has ever stopped and said the thing that any of us, looking at Springfield from the outside, would immediately say, something is deeply wrong here. That question, that single, obvious, deeply reasonable question, the one that the show has been preventing its own characters from asking for 36 years, is where we begin tonight. Let's start with what the show actually tells us, clearly and directly, about the physical reality of the town Springfield's residents live in. The Springfield Nuclear Power Plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. It is owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. It is the primary source of electrical power for the entire town of Springfield. Every light, every appliance, every neon sign and every street lamp and every television set and every refrigerator humming in every kitchen in Springfield draws its power from energy generated by the facility Burns owns. The plant has been operating for decades, and in all that time of operation, it has accumulated a safety record that is not merely bad. It is operationally catastrophic in ways that defy easy summary. A surprise inspection conducted by federal authorities turned up 342 separate safety violations inside the facility. That is not a typo. 342. The estimated cost of bringing the plant into compliance with basic federal safety standards was $56 million. Burns refused to pay it. Not because the money was unavailable. Burns is a billionaire many times over, and $56 million represents a relatively modest fraction of his accumulated wealth. He refused because the act of paying to fix the violations would require formally acknowledging that the violations existed. And acknowledging that the violations existed would mean someone might start asking questions, not just about the violations themselves, but about what those violations had already been doing across years of unchecked operation to the people living in the immediate vicinity of a nuclear facility managed to those standards. So the money stayed in Burns's accounts and the violations stayed in the plant, and the plant kept running. The violations themselves are worth going through in some detail because the summary of them tells you something important about what kind of facility this actually is. Radioactive waste is being dumped directly into local waterways. Not accidentally, not as the result of an isolated incident, but as a regular operating practice. Radioactive waste is being deposited on the grounds of Springfield's children's playground. Plutonium, one of the most radioactive substances produced by nuclear fission, is being used as a paperweight on someone's desk inside the facility. The cooling towers, which are the structures responsible for preventing the reactor from overheating and are among the most critical safety components of any nuclear plant, have cracks in them. Those cracks have been addressed not by structural repair or professional remediation, but by being patched with chewing gum. Literal chewing gum applied to the cracked walls of nuclear cooling towers by someone who could not be bothered to call a contractor. The lower levels of the facility are home to rats, luminous rats. Rats that glow with a light that is not natural and does not require explanation within the show because the show treats it as a minor background detail in the same category as the chewing gum cooling towers. And then there is the basement. The show drops this particular detail into the narrative with the same casual ease it uses for everything else. Human skeletons have been found in the basement of the Springfield nuclear power plant. Human skeletons. In the basement of an active, operating nuclear power facility. The show does not explain who these people were. It does not explore how they died or how they came to be there or whether anyone has ever investigated their presence. It shows you the bones, and then the camera moves away, and Springfield absorbs this information the same way Springfield absorbs all information that should alarm it, without reaction, without comment, without a single person asking the most basic question available. Now consider who is responsible for preventing all of this from becoming worse. The safety inspector for the Springfield nuclear power plant. The man whose professional role, whose entire reason for employment within the facility, is to identify hazards, flag violations, ensure regulatory compliance, and stand between the power plant's operations and the health of the people living in its shadow. That man is Homer J. Simpson. The show's own creator has stated on the record that Homer's IQ is 55. 55 is the number. This is not a general impression of Homer's intellectual limitations. Not a vague sense that he is not the sharpest person in the room. This is a specific figure provided by the person who created the character, and it places Homer's cognitive function at a level that in most clinical frameworks would qualify as significant intellectual disability. In Season 12, this specific cognitive situation is explored in detail. Homer discovers that a crayon has been lodged in his brain since childhood. The crayon was apparently inserted into his nasal passage at some point in his youth and traveled to his brain, where it has been sitting ever since, physically pressing on neural tissue, reducing his cognitive capacity in ways that are measurable and specific. When the crayon is removed, a medical procedure that should not be possible to perform in the casual, low-stakes context the show depicts, but which the show depicts anyway, Homer's IQ spikes dramatically. He becomes articulate and perceptive, and capable of complex, sustained reasoning. The world opens up for him in ways it never has before. But the crayon is only part of the story, because even before it is removed, the underlying neurological profile of Homer Simpson is one of extraordinary limitation. He sleeps at his workstation. He has eaten donuts during active meltdown warnings at the facility, the alarm having apparently become associated in his conditioned responses not with emergency but with snack time. He once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to see if the donut would grow larger. He has, by all available evidence, virtually no functional understanding of nuclear physics, radiation safety, emergency response protocols, regulatory requirements, or anything else that one might reasonably expect the safety inspector of a nuclear power plant to understand? This is the person standing watch over the plant that provides power to an entire American town. He has been standing that watch, failing that watch, for more than 3 decades. And across all of those years, across all of those days of Homer sleeping at his station while the cooling towers leaked, and the radioactive waste found its way into the playgrounds, and the luminous rats moved through the lower floors, the violations accumulated, and the plant kept running, and the town kept drinking the water, and nobody asked the question. The first visible mutation that the show introduces appears in Season 2. Blinky, a 3-eyed fish pulled from a river near the power plant. The image of Blinky is one of the most recognizable things The Simpsons has ever produced. A fish that should have 2 eyes and has 3, pulled from water that the nuclear plant's runoff has been reaching, held up by a gubernatorial candidate as proof that Burns is actively poisoning the local environment. The political response to Blinky follows a pattern that will become very familiar over the course of the show. Burns is forced to address the problem publicly. He sits down on live television and eats the fish, the whole fish, on camera, in front of the entire town as proof that Blinky is harmless and the water is fine. The gesture is absurd, the kind of thing that would not convince a reasonably skeptical 5-year-old that there was nothing to worry about. A powerful man eating a mutated fish on television does not prove the water is safe. It proves only that he was willing to eat a mutated fish on television. But Springfield is persuaded. The candidate loses the election. The story disappears. Nobody conducts a follow-up study. Nobody sends someone to collect more fish from that river and see whether Blinky is an isolated anomaly or part of a pattern. Nobody tests the water supply, or the soil, or the air quality near the plant. Nobody asks the question that should follow naturally and immediately from the existence of a 3-eyed fish in a river downstream from a nuclear facility. The question is simple. If the fish have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people who have been drinking from the same source? The show answers this question. It provides the answer specifically and directly, but it provides the answer through visual accumulation rather than stated exposition, across dozens of episodes, in a way that is easy to absorb as aesthetic choice and never quite process as information. The answer arrives most clearly in Season 8, in an episode called The Springfield Files. Homer is walking through the woods near the town at night. He encounters something in the trees, a figure, glowing, moving with the slow, dazed movements of something that has just been through a profound experience and is not quite back to full consciousness. The figure emits a visible light from its body, a faint green glow that illuminates the darkness around it. It turns toward Homer, and Homer, confronted with this glowing entity in the woods at night, reacts the way Homer reacts to most things that exceed his cognitive processing capacity. He screams and runs. The episode builds its mystery with genuine craft. Homer's account of what he saw is met with the range of reactions you would expect in a town like Springfield: ridicule from most people, intense interest from a fringe, and eventual escalation to the point where actual FBI agents are called in to investigate. Mulder and Scully, the fictional agents from the X-Files, arrive in Springfield to look into the case. The town holds its collective breath. Whatever Homer saw in those woods, the episode establishes, is real. It left physical evidence. Witnesses corroborate parts of Homer's account. Something was there. And when the reveal finally comes, when the true identity of the glowing figure in the woods is established beyond doubt, the answer is not extraterrestrial. The glowing figure is Charles Montgomery Burns. Burns has been undergoing a weekly medical treatment of such intensity, so comprehensively loaded with chemicals and radiation therapy, that after each session his body emits a visible green light. This is not a metaphor. This is not a visual shorthand for something symbolic. Burns's body, saturated with the specific cocktail of treatments that his medical team has developed to keep him alive, literally glows in the dark. The glow fades over the course of the subsequent week as his system processes the treatment and the levels stabilize, at which point the treatment needs to be administered again. The treatment cycle is precise: 7 days. Burns receives the treatment, glows for a period afterward, recovers over the course of the week, and by the end of 7 days, if the treatment is not administered again, his system begins to fail. He requires the treatment every week, without exception, to survive. This is not a medication with a flexible dosing schedule. This is a maintenance protocol with a hard deadline. miss the deadline, and Burns dies. He wanders through the woods after his treatments because the intensity of what his body has just been through produces a kind of euphoric disorientation that he apparently processes best by walking outside in the dark. He does not arrange transportation from his treatment facility. He walks, in a daze, glowing visibly, through the trees near Springfield, and this has apparently been his post-treatment routine for long enough that it has become unremarkable to everyone who knows about it. The people of Springfield, who live in a town dominated by a nuclear power plant, who drink water that runs through the same watershed as the plant's runoff, who have already observed that the fish in local rivers have developed additional eyes. These people look at a glowing human figure moving through the woods, and their collective conclusion is that it must be an alien from outer space. The nuclear power plant, visible from most of the town, humming at the edge of their horizon every day of their lives, does not occur to them as a possible explanation for a man who glows in the dark. That is the level of dissociation Springfield maintains between its observable reality and its acknowledged reality. That is how deep the separation between what people see and what people allow themselves to conclude has become. In the Simpsons movie, released in 2007, the environmental situation in Springfield reaches a narrative climax that the show depicts with specificity and detail. Springfield's pollution levels cross a threshold. The contamination is no longer limited to local waterways and soil. The problem has become comprehensive enough, measurable enough, documentable enough, that the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States, operating within the show's fictional universe as a real federal regulatory agency with actual authority, makes a decision. They seal the town under a glass dome. The dome is massive. It covers the entire town. It is lowered from above with the finality of a container being sealed and placed in storage. The EPA's assessment, as depicted in the film, is that Springfield's contamination has reached the point where the only viable option is physical containment, preventing the pollution from spreading beyond the town's boundaries into the surrounding region. The rest of the country needs to be protected from Springfield. Think about what that assessment means in practical terms. The United States government, having evaluated the situation in Springfield, determined that remediation was not achievable, that cleanup was not the appropriate response, that intervention and correction were insufficient answers to the problem. The appropriate answer, the government concluded, was to seal the town and the people inside it and ensure that whatever Springfield had become could not affect the world beyond its borders. Springfield was not just polluted. Springfield was classified as a containment situation, an environmental hazard zone, the kind of problem you put a physical barrier around and step back from. And the people of Springfield, every single resident who had been drinking the water and breathing the air and living under the shadow of those cracked cooling towers for years, were inside the dome when it went up. Now, look at those residents. Look at them with the attentiveness that the show's own characters consistently refuse to apply. Homer Simpson. His overbite is pronounced enough to qualify as a physical anomaly. His eyes protrude from his face in ways that do not reflect normal human ocular anatomy. He has 4 fingers on each hand. His skull is a shape that does not occur in the range of natural human variation. His IQ, as established by the show's own creator, places him at the far edge of cognitive limitation. His body absorbs physical damage that should kill him repeatedly. Across hundreds of episodes, he survives injuries that the show acknowledges should be fatal and recovers from that damage with a speed and completeness that no ordinary human biology would support. He has worked, for his entire adult life, in direct daily proximity to an active nuclear reactor. Marge Simpson. The same protruding eyes. The same 4-finger hands. Her hair, which grows straight upward in a blue tower that she has maintained in precisely the same shape across 36 years of marriage and family life, defies both the laws of physics and the understood properties of human hair. No styling product, no amount of maintenance, no commitment to personal routine produces hair that behaves the way Marge's hair behaves. It simply grows that way, as naturally and as permanently as though the upward direction were the only direction it had ever been intended to go. Marge was herself, briefly, employed at the nuclear power plant. She worked inside the facility. She was exposed to the same violations, the same leaking infrastructure, the same ambient radiation that has been saturating the town for as long as the plant has been operating. All three of her children were born after both parents had spent significant time in Springfield's contaminated environment. Bart, Lisa, Maggie, all born in Springfield, all raised on Springfield's water, all breathing Springfield's air, all showing the same constellation of physical characteristics: the impossible hair, the overbites, the yellow skin that none of them shares with anyone who lives outside the town. The yellow skin, this is the detail that, when you give it your full attention, stops feeling like an art direction decision and starts feeling like something that the show has been embedding in plain sight for 36 years. Every Springfield resident is yellow. Not people who visit Springfield. Not characters who come from elsewhere and pass through. The people who live there, who were born there, or have lived there for extended periods, they are yellow. Their skin is a color that does not appear in any natural human population. It is specific to them. It travels with them wherever they go, but it is most concentrated in Springfield, in the town, in the community built around the plant. When celebrities appear in Springfield, when guest characters arrive from outside the town and stay for an episode, they look different. They are drawn with more conventionally human proportions. Their eyes sit in their faces differently. Their features more closely approximate what actual human faces look like. The show draws outsiders with observably different visual characteristics than it draws its permanent residents. The explanation everyone has always accepted for this difference is that it's simply the art style. That's how The Simpsons looks. Everyone in Springfield is yellow because of the show's visual vocabulary, and the guests look different because the show adjusts its visual approach slightly for celebrity appearances, making them more recognizable. But try holding this for a moment without that explanation. Just the observation without the frame. Inside the fictional world the show has built, there is a consistent, visible difference between people who live in Springfield and people who come from somewhere else. The people who live in Springfield look one specific way. The people who come from outside Springfield look another way. The distinction is so consistent that it functions as a categorization system inside the contamination zone versus outside it. The people inside look like what 30-plus years of nuclear exposure does to biology. The people outside look like what biology looks like without that exposure. The animals follow the same pattern. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family's greyhound, has the same bulging proportions as the humans around him. He does not look like an actual greyhound in the way that a dog photographed at a dog show looks like a greyhound. He looks like a Springfield organism, subtly but consistently different from the reference creature he is supposed to represent. Blinky the fish has 3 eyes. The show uses Blinky as a direct statement about what the plant's runoff does to living things. It tells you, through Blinky, that the radiation produces visible mutations in organisms that live in its path. It then expects you to conclude that the humans living in that same path are entirely unaffected. Burns knows. The show makes this clear not through a single dramatic scene in which Burns confesses his awareness of the plant's effects, but through the slow accumulation of episodes that, taken together, paint a portrait of a man who has been carefully managing this knowledge for a very long time. He funds private medical research. He maintains personal physicians whose specific expertise aligns with managing radiation-related biological processes. He undergoes weekly treatments that are themselves radiation-dependent. Burns's understanding of what radiation does to biological systems is not abstract or theoretical. It is practical and personal, and informed by a century of living inside the specific situation he has created for everyone else in Springfield. He knows what the plant produces. He knows where it goes. He knows what it does to the water, to the soil, to the air, to the bodies of people who live downwind and downstream. He knows this because he is himself the most extreme example of what radiation does to a biological system when that system has been subjected to it long enough and has had sufficient resources to develop a management strategy. He is what Springfield's residents would be if they had the resources to manage their own contamination. He is Springfield maintained. And Homer's employment is not negligence. The show provides the evidence for this reading in the episode where German investors briefly purchase the plant. The new owners, applying straightforward business logic to their acquisition, immediately fire Homer. He is obviously unsuited to the role. He is obviously dangerous in it. The calculus of keeping Homer employed, from any rational perspective, does not add up. He is a liability. The Germans then begin assessing what it would actually cost to bring the facility up to code, and the figure they encounter very nearly bankrupts them. The violations are so extensive, so deeply built into the plant's operations, so comprehensively woven into how the facility functions on a day-to-day basis, that remediation would require essentially rebuilding the plant from the inside out. Burns buys the plant back. Burns immediately rehires Homer. A competent safety inspector would shut the plant down within a working week. A competent safety inspector would generate paperwork, would create documentation, would establish a formal record of exactly what the plant is doing and has been doing, which is the kind of record that regulatory agencies use to compel remediation and, when remediation is refused, to compel closure. Homer ensures that no such record exists. Homer is the mechanism by which the violations continue. He is the reason the radiation keeps leaking. He is the reason the water stays the way it is. His incompetence is not a liability to Burns. It is Burns's most valuable operational asset. The season 12 episode in which Homer's crayon is removed and his intelligence spikes provides the theory with one of its most quietly devastating pieces of evidence. When Homer becomes intelligent, when the physical impediment to his cognition is removed and his full cognitive capacity is suddenly accessible to him, the first thing that changes is his relationship to his own life. He sees it clearly. He sees his job clearly. He sees the town he lives in, the plant he works at, the employer he works for, with a clarity that he has never had access to before, and it makes him miserable. Not in a temporary way. Not in the way that new information sometimes makes you uncomfortable before you integrate it and move on. In a profound, fundamental way, the intelligent Homer sees Springfield and finds it unbearable. He sees his situation and cannot reconcile himself to it. The clarity is not a gift. The clarity is a burden he cannot carry, so he has the crayon put back in. He chooses, consciously and deliberately, to return to the foggy state. He chooses cognitive impairment over clear sight. The show presents this as a piece of character comedy. Homer being Homer, choosing comfort over growth, unable to sustain the discomfort that intelligence demands. But inside the theory, the choice reads differently. Homer could not sustain clear sight, because clear sight, in Springfield, means seeing everything the radiation theory describes. It means understanding the architecture of his own situation. It means knowing what the plant is doing and who is responsible, and what the entire arrangement of his life actually rests on. And that is too much to hold. For anyone, let alone someone who has been dealing with the effects of decades of environmental contamination on top of the specific cognitive impairment of a crayon in his brain. Homer chose the fog because the fog was the only thing that made the life livable. How did a crayon end up in a child's brain without anyone discovering it? How does a child go through his entire childhood, his entire adolescence, his entire adult life visiting doctors in a town with 2 hospitals, and not one physician finds a foreign object embedded in his skull? Either every medical professional in Springfield is operating at a level of incompetence so profound it strains credulity even by Springfield's generous standards, or the crayon was known about, and the decision was made to leave it. If Burns's influence extends into Springfield's healthcare infrastructure, and the show establishes repeatedly that Burns owns and controls significant portions of the town's economic and institutional life, then, a known cognitive impairment in the safety inspector of his nuclear plant is not a medical oversight. It is a policy. The radiation theory, followed to its conclusion, explains everything about Springfield that has ever seemed strange. The aging freeze, the reset button between episodes, Homer's physical indestructibility, Burns's extraordinary longevity, the collective amnesia about catastrophic events, the inability of anyone to form the questions that their situation plainly demands. All of it downstream from the same source. All of it traceable to those cooling towers. All of it evidence of a system that has been running exactly as its architect intended for as long as its architect has been alive to maintain it. Springfield is a contamination zone. Its residents are not eccentric characters in a long-running cartoon. They are symptomatic. They are what people look like and think like and behave like, when the thing that provides their power has also been quietly reshaping them for as long as they can remember. The plant is the show. It is the premise and the setting and the cause and the ongoing condition. It has always been all of those things, and nobody in Springfield will ever understand that, because the plant already ensured that they cannot. Before we move forward, take a slow breath in. Let it out without hurrying. Let your body sink a little further into whatever you are lying on. The first section is behind us now. The contamination, the three-eyed fish, the glowing billionaire in the woods, the dome, the yellow skin, all of that is in place. All of that is the foundation. If you are watching this late at night, or in the early hours of the morning, with the room dark and the world quiet outside your window, drop a comment and tell me where you are and what time it is. I love knowing who is out there in the dark with me. And if you want these to carry you through the night on a regular basis, subscribing means you will never miss a new one. They will just be there waiting for you. Now, let's go deeper. Section 2. Homer's coma theory. Everything we just worked through, the contamination, the mutations, the three-eyed fish, the glowing billionaire, the dome, the systematic impairment of the town's ability to understand its own situation, all of that could be true. All of that evidence holds together. The theory has real weight. But here's the question that the coma theory poses to it. What if all of that is also, simultaneously, happening inside the mind of a man who has been unconscious since April of 1993? What if the radiation theory is correct in every detail, and the person who figured it all out is lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, hooked up to monitors, generating the entire picture through the last gasp operation of a damaged brain that went under in the 18th episode of the 4th season and never came back? This is the Homer coma theory. Among the most discussed, most developed, and most internally consistent pieces of fan analysis that The Simpsons has generated in its 36 years of existence. It has been addressed by the show's own writing staff. It has been referenced by its executive producers. It has been animated, in a sense, into an episode that the show then officially denied and called a hoax. The theory exists in that particular state where the official dismissal of it somehow makes it more compelling rather than less. Let's build it properly. On the 1st of April 1993, the 18th episode of the show's 4th season aired. The title was So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. And the date of broadcast, April Fool's Day, is something to hold on to, because the theory has things to say about that coincidence. The episode's premise is one of the show's simplest. Bart, in the spirit of the day, decides to play escalating April Fool's Day pranks on Homer. Each prank builds on the last. Each one is more creative, more elaborate, more committed to Homer's maximum frustration. The show plays this as the comfortable father-son comedy it often is. Homer's exasperation, Bart's delight, the cycling rhythm of their relationship. The final prank goes beyond the established range. Bart takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop. He places the can inside an industrial paint shaker, a device designed to agitate paint cans to mix their contents through high-intensity vibration. He shakes the beer can until the pressure inside it is multiple times what any normal can would sustain. He then returns the can to the refrigerator, indistinguishable from any other. When Homer finds it, when Homer opens it, the resulting explosion is sufficient to hospitalize him. Homer is taken to Springfield General. He is in a hospital bed, recovering, his family gathered. The family scenes have the texture that the show's early seasons were known for: genuine emotional warmth underneath the comedy, the sense of a real family doing the difficult thing of being present for one of their members who is hurt. And then Homer sees the vending machine across the room. He gets up, he crosses to it. Still recovering from the blast, still not at full physical capacity, he reaches the machine. He tries to get the candy bar he has decided he needs. The machine tips. It falls toward him. It crushes him. Homer Simpson flatlines. He enters a coma. The show is explicit about this. Not a joke, not a dream sequence, not a cutaway gag. A clinical coma, documented by the medical staff, acknowledged by the characters around him. His family gathers at his bedside. The monitors show what they show. Homer's brain activity is at the level of a man whose conscious mind has gone somewhere that the machines cannot fully track. He lies there for 7 weeks. At the end of the episode, Homer wakes up. Bart is at his bedside, tearful, confessing that he was responsible for the whole chain of events. Homer springs to consciousness, reaches for Bart's throat in his characteristic throttling gesture, and the family laughs. The show resolves. Homer is back. Everything is fine. But before the episode ends, a piece of information is delivered. Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5%, the doctors tell him. Permanently. Those neurons are gone. They are not recovering. Homer responds to learning this by laughing, while simultaneously expressing confusion about why he is laughing. The family finds this charming, or at least characteristic. The episode ends. The show moves on. For 32 more years. The theory holds that Homer did not wake up, that the waking, the strangling, the laugh, the credits, all of it was the first moment of the dream. That Homer's brain, damaged beyond the 5% the doctors announced, generating whatever activity it could sustain from inside a comatose state, produced a waking scene that was itself part of the fiction. That Homer never returned to consciousness. That every episode since that April night is a dream. The evidence for this reading is substantial. It is not, importantly, a single killer piece of proof. It is an accumulation, a pattern, the kind of evidence that builds gradually until it reaches a tipping point, at which the alternative explanation that everything is fine and Homer just recovered and the show went on requires more work to sustain than the coma explanation does. The most significant piece of evidence is tonal. It is the shift in the character and quality of the show's storytelling that happens in the period following the coma episode. Before that episode, The Simpsons told stories that were grounded in the texture of recognizable human experience. The financial anxiety of a family living paycheck to paycheck, the specific strains of a marriage between two people who are different in important ways and have to keep finding each other. The experience of being a child who is struggling academically and has to decide whether to fight that struggle or accept the path of least resistance. The loneliness of being the most intelligent person in a room and having no one to talk to about it at a level that would feel satisfying. These are everyday stories. Not in the sense that they are undramatic, but in the sense that they are the stories of actual human lives. A family sitcom grounded in economic and emotional reality, told through the amplifying lens of satire. The humor came from the gap between what these characters aspired to and what their circumstances allowed, and from the specific absurdities of being alive in the specific way they were alive. After the coma episode, the show becomes something different. Homer goes to space. He goes to space in an actual rocket, in an actual NASA mission, because Homer Simpson is selected as a civilian passenger on a space shuttle. This is a canonical event in the show's universe, not a dream sequence, not a what-if episode. Homer Simpson went to space. He has been to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. The Loch Ness Monster is real within the show's universe, and Burns captures it. Homer joins a secret society that operates with considerable power within Springfield's civic life. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group that briefly takes over the maintenance of public order in Springfield. Homer discovers that his mother, who he has believed dead his entire adult life, has actually been a fugitive activist living underground, driven there by a confrontation with Burns in 1969. Homer meets God. Not in a figurative or symbolic sense. Homer meets God and has conversations with God. Homer meets God twice. The escalation is dramatic, and it is not subtle. The show goes from a family comedy grounded in middle-class economic anxiety to a program where the central character has visited dozens of countries, held hundreds of different jobs across the full spectrum of professional possibilities, befriended celebrities from every field of human endeavor, survived physical experiences that would be fatal to any actual human being on multiple separate occasions, and operated in a fictional universe where the rules of physics, biology, and narrative logic are optional. This shift has been the subject of continuous fan discussion for decades. The internet has been arguing about when The Simpsons lost its way, when it stopped being what it used to be, what caused the decline, since at least the early 2000s. The consensus is that something changed in the middle seasons of the show, and the later seasons are a different kind of program than the early seasons were. The coma theory gives this observation a precise answer. The show did not lose its way. Homer's brain got worse. Each escalating absurdity, each impossible adventure, each narrative that could not fit inside a grounded, realistic representation of working-class Springfield life is a symptom. The dreams of a deteriorating brain become less organized over time. They become less tethered to the reference points the dreamer had available when they went under. They become more fantastic, more loosely assembled, more willing to violate the internal logic of the world they are generating, Because the machinery generating them is running at reduced capacity, and the editorial oversight that would flag inconsistencies is simply not available. The early seasons are the vivid, organized, emotionally coherent dreams of a brain that still has most of its function intact. The later seasons are the fragmentary, surreal, physics-optional dreams of a brain that has been unconscious for decades and is operating on whatever reserves it has left. 6 months before the coma episode aired, in the season 4 premiere, Homer had a conversation with God. The episode is called Homer the Heretic. It is a good episode, a funny episode, one of the more theologically interesting 30 minutes of animated television ever produced. In it, Homer decides to stop going to church on Sundays and instead spends his Sundays at home, relaxing, experiencing a level of personal contentment that he does not usually have access to. The episode's comedy comes from the gap between Homer's private contentment and Marge's anxiety about the state of his soul. And in the episode, Homer has a dream. He talks with God. The conversation is real within the show's universe. This is not a joke or a delusion. Homer speaks with God and God speaks back. The conversation covers various things, and God, in the gentle way that the show depicts divine communication, drops a specific piece of information into the exchange. He tells Homer that Homer will learn the meaning of life, but not yet. God tells Homer that Homer's time is coming. 6 months after that conversation, Homer is in a coma. The coma theory asks you to read this sequence without the frame of comedy. Not as a funny theological moment in a character-focused episode, but as a narrative element with a relationship to subsequent narrative events. God told Homer, 6 months before the vending machine fell, that his time was coming, that there was something he would understand eventually, but the moment for understanding it had not yet arrived, that there was a future event implicit in their conversation. 6 months later, the event arrived. If you accept the coma reading, what God was doing in that conversation was preparing Homer, not for an adventure, not for a comic misadventure, for the end of his waking life. Homer's time was coming in the most literal sense. The last 6 months of his conscious existence, ticking down from the premiere of the 4th season to the 18th episode, were already marked when God spoke to him. And everything since then, all the adventures, all the impossible jobs, all the celebrity encounters, all the moments of survival against impossible odds is what Homer's mind has been doing with the time since the vending machine fell. The aging problem is where the coma theory does its most elegant, most quietly devastating work. Nobody in Springfield ages. This is the show's central impossibility. Everyone who has ever watched The Simpsons knows this, and most people have a ready explanation. It's an animated show. Animated shows don't age their characters. The floating timeline is a production convention that allows the series to continue indefinitely without having to rebuild its premise from scratch every decade. This explanation is correct. It accurately describes why the decision was made. But the coma theory offers something different. Something that operates inside the show's own fictional world rather than in the world of production decisions. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went to sleep in April 1993 and never woke up. Homer's unconscious brain cannot age Bart because Homer was not there when Bart aged. The brain generates what it knows, what it has stored, what it had available when it went under. Homer's last conscious memory of Bart was of a 10-year-old boy. Homer's last conscious memory of Lisa was of an 8-year-old girl. His last memory of Maggie was of a 1-year-old who communicated through pacifier sounds and pointed stares. His last memory of Marge was of Marge, as she was then the same blue hair, the same face, the same person he had been waking up next to for years. The dream preserves them because the dream has nothing else to work with. It cannot imagine what they look like at ages Homer has not observed, because observation is the raw material of imagination, and Homer's access to new observation ended the moment the machine fell. Of course, his children don't age. Of course, Marge doesn't get older. Of course, the house on Evergreen Terrace looks the same in 2025 as it looked in 1993. Memory does not add wrinkles. Memory does not add gray hair or the specific weight of years passing on a face. Memory locks its subjects in place at the moment of last observation and holds them there, indefinitely, with perfect faithfulness. Bart is 10 years old forever because 10 is the last age Homer had a chance to know him. That is not a production convenience. That is the saddest sentence in the entire theory. The celebrity appearances in the show's later seasons fit the coma framework with a neatness that is almost uncomfortable. After the coma episode, the show begins featuring celebrity guest appearances at a dramatically increased rate. Famous musicians, actors, athletes, and public figures pass through Springfield in enormous numbers across the later seasons. The show becomes, in certain episodes, almost a parade of cultural figures, each appearing for a segment before the story moves on to the next one. The sheer volume of celebrity guests in the later seasons is one of the things that distinguishes them from the earlier ones. Inside the coma theory, this is not the writing staff chasing ratings by booking famous names. This is Homer's brain, lying in a hospital room where the world continues to move without him, absorbing ambient input. The television in the corner of his room is on. Conversations happen at his bedside. Visitors bring news. The radio plays. Healthcare workers talk to each other around him about things happening in the world outside his condition. And Homer's dreaming mind hears fragments of all of this. A name, a voice, a snippet of a song that's playing somewhere down the hall, a reference to someone famous that a nurse drops in passing. The brain, running its simulation, incorporates these fragments into the dream. It does not have a clear picture of who these people are. The information arrives as fragments through the fog of unconsciousness. So it builds characters from those fragments, populates Springfield with them, gives them approximate shapes based on what the brain can construct from partial information. Every celebrity in the later seasons is a noise Homer heard through the veil, a voice from the television he cannot see, a name spoken in a room he cannot fully access. His mind takes the fragment and builds it into a dream character, and the character shows up in Springfield, and the episode plays out, and the fragment is absorbed into the simulation. The show is not a magnet for famous people. It is a man's unconscious mind processing the ambient sounds of a hospital room. The show acknowledged this theory in its 34th season, not directly, not as a formal confirmation, but in a way that is too specific to be accidental. The episode Lisa the Boy Scout features what was described at the time as a deliberately leaked fake deleted scene, a clip showing Homer waking up in a hospital bed and the revelation being made explicit. Everything since the coma had been a dream. The clip was animated. It was fully voiced. It was shown to the audience as something that had been created for the show, whether or not it had been created as an official part of the episode. And then the show said it was not real. It was characterized as a hoax, something planted by outside parties, not an official product of the show's creative team. A fabrication. The audience was told to disregard it, but the clip existed. Someone made it. Someone at the level of production where animation and voice recording happen made a clip showing Homer waking from a coma and confirming the theory. And then the official response to that clip was a denial wrapped in the language of hoax and hacking. The writers showed you the answer and then told you the answer was a lie, which is, the coma theory would observe exactly what a dream does. A dream sometimes briefly clarifies you realize, inside the dream, that you are dreaming. And then the dream reasserts itself. The brief lucidity is absorbed back into the fiction. The realization is forgotten. The simulation continues. Al Jean, the executive producer, addressed the theory directly in 2015. He said it was not true. He said Homer was not in a coma and the show was not a coma dream. He did not explain why nobody ages. He did not address the tonal shift after season 4. He did not mention the God conversation 6 months before the incident, or the 5% brain function loss revealed in the episode's final moments, or the fact that the show has become progressively more surreal and internally inconsistent in exactly the pattern you would expect from a dream being generated by a slowly deteriorating brain. He said it was not true, and the interview moved on. The fans did not move on, because the theory does something that no official explanation manages to do. It makes the whole thing make sense. Not just the pieces that are already interesting in isolation, but the whole shape of the show, the aging freeze, the tonal shift, the celebrity flood, the escalating absurdity, the reset button, Homer's physical indestructibility, the way the show keeps generating itself without apparent end, always finding another story, always returning to the same house on the same street, always resolving, always intact. The emotional center of the theory is simple enough to say in one sentence and complex enough to sit with for a long time. Homer is dreaming about his family because they are the only thing worth dreaming about. His deepest wish? The thing his unconscious mind has been constructing for decades in the dark is not adventure. It is not celebrity encounters or space travel or any of the elaborate plots the later seasons have sent him through. It is the house on Evergreen Terrace. Marge in the kitchen. Bart somewhere nearby making trouble. Lisa playing her saxophone. Maggie watching everything with those enormous eyes. He wants his family to still be there. He wants his children to still be young enough that he is essential to them. He wants his marriage to still be the thing that defines his days. He wants Friday night at home to last forever. And in the dream, it does. Every episode, the family is assembled. Every episode, they face something together and they come through it together, and by the end of the episode, they are back on the couch, intact. Every disaster resolved. Every distance closed. Every moment of separation ended by return. The house is there. The family is there. Everything is fine. Homer's coma is not a nightmare. It is a man's most private wish made into an infinite loop. The world he wanted. Running forever. The children always young. The marriage always present. The home always waiting at the end of the adventure. And every time Homer survives something in the show that should kill him, every time the world resets after a disaster, every time the credits roll and everything is back to normal, and the same family is in the same house, it is not lazy writing. It is not cartoon logic. It is a dreaming man's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, Homer wakes up. And waking up means finding out how many years have passed. Means finding out what his children really look like now. Whether Marge is still there, whether anyone is, or waking up means not waking up at all. That is the Homer coma theory. A man who went to sleep on April Fool's Day 1993 and has been dreaming about his family ever since because they are the only thing his damaged, diminishing mind has decided is worth the effort of sustaining. Every episode you have ever watched is a love letter from an unconscious father to the family he cannot reach, written in the only language available to him. Written in the dark. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? The summer of 1995 was when The Simpsons did something that no animated program had ever attempted before, and that very few programs of any kind had managed with this level of cultural coordination. They built a mystery. A real one, with real suspects and real clues and real stakes. And they built an industry around that mystery, a national contest. A tie-in with America's Most Wanted, promotional materials, water cooler conversation, and a summer of genuine collective uncertainty about the answer. Who shot Mr. Burns? We know what the show told us. Season 7, Episode 1. The case is closed. Maggie Simpson. The baby did it. Burns identified her when he woke from his own coma. Case closed? Move on. But the case was never really closed. And the more carefully you examine the circumstances around the official answer, the more the word closed and the word solved begin to look like very different things. Let's go back to part 1 and establish the full situation, because it matters. Season 6, Episode 25. Who shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. The episode builds its mystery through the systematic construction of motive. Burns, over the course of the episode, manages to do grievous harm to essentially every named character in Springfield. He does this not incidentally, not as collateral damage from a plan that targets someone else. He does it comprehensively, deliberately, with the particular efficiency of a man who has been practicing casual malevolence for over a century. He steals the oil well discovered beneath Springfield Elementary School. The school had been struggling financially for years. The oil well represented a solution, a source of funding that could stabilize the budget, restore cut programs, and give Springfield Elementary the resources to actually educate the children it serves. Burns drills from adjacent property, siphons the oil from beneath the school without permission, and pockets the proceeds. The school loses the windfall it briefly believed it had. Programs are cut again. Staff lose jobs. He uses his financial resources to drive Moe's Tavern out of business. Moe Cieslak's bar is not just Moe's livelihood. It is an institution in Springfield's social geography. It is the place Homer and his friends gather. It is a community anchor in the specific, irreplaceable way that neighborhood bars function in communities. Burns destroys it not because it competes with his business interests, it does not, but because he can. Because eliminating things that other people care about is a form of power demonstration, and Burns enjoys demonstrations of power. He creates a sinkhole beneath the Springfield retirement castle. The building collapses. Its elderly residents, including Abe Simpson, are displaced. People who should be in a place of security and stability are suddenly in crisis, through no fault of their own, because the man who owns the land adjacent to the facility decided that the oil beneath it was worth extracting regardless of the structural consequences for the buildings above. He injures Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog. In an incident that reads as almost casual, Burns causes harm to a beloved animal that the family specifically rescued from miserable circumstances. And then, for the conclusion of his escalation, Burns deploys his masterwork. He builds a device designed to block out the sun over Springfield. Not partially, completely. A mechanical disc, large enough to cover the sky above the town, positioned to prevent sunlight from reaching the ground below. His stated purpose is monopoly. Without the sun, nothing in Springfield can generate power except the electricity provided by his plant. Every resident becomes fully, inescapably dependent on Burns for the energy to heat their homes, cook their food, light their streets, power everything that requires power. Burns wants to own the only light source Springfield has access to. When Smithers, who has spent his entire professional life in Burns' service, objects to this plan, who draws the line at stealing the sun as the step too far, the act that even his extraordinary tolerance for Burns' behavior cannot accommodate, Burns fires him. On the spot. Smithers is out. By the end of Part 1, every significant character in Springfield had a reason to want Burns dead. Not in the casual, figurative sense that people sometimes say. Every significant character. The show took considerable time establishing specific, personal, concrete motives for dozens of people. Homer, who Burns had never managed to learn the name of despite years of employment. Bart and Lisa, whose school had lost its funding and its oil. Grandpa, whose home had been destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, who lost his job when the school budget collapsed. Tito Puente, the musician, whose program Burns cut. Mo, whose bar was gone. Smithers, freshly terminated after a lifetime of service. The town gathered at a meeting. Multiple people were visibly armed. The tension was at a level the show had never built to before. And then Burns appeared, arrogant and unrepentant, and the confrontation escalated until a gun went off. Burns fell against the town's sundial. His hands landed on two letters, W and S, from the perspective of someone looking at him. M and S, from his own perspective, facing outward. He was loaded into an ambulance. The screen went dark. America had the entire summer to wonder. Part 2 arrived in September. The resolution is structured as a comic procedural. Springfield's police department, under Chief Wiggum's leadership, goes through the motions of investigation with the thoroughness you would expect from Chief Wiggum, which is to say, not very much. Smithers immediately confesses. He feels guilty, he says. He was drunk. He had a gun. He was angry. Of course it was him, except the timeline does not work out the way Smithers thinks it does. When investigators check his account, they discover that Smithers was, at the relevant moment, somewhere else entirely, shooting a different person in a different part of town. He shot Jasper, in the leg, specifically in Jasper's wooden leg, in an incident unrelated to Burns. Smithers was drunk enough that he conflated his memory of that incident with an assumed responsibility for the Burns shooting. He did not shoot Burns. He shot someone else and felt terrible about it. One by one, the suspects produce alibis or are eliminated. Principal Skinner can account for his whereabouts. Mo can account for his. Tito Puente provides the most memorable alibi in television history. A fully choreographed musical number explaining that he processed his rage through artistic expression rather than violence. He wrote a samba instead of pulling a trigger. The investigation stalls until physical evidence surfaces. An eyelash found on Burns' suit is submitted for DNA analysis. The result identifies the eyelash as belonging to a member of the Simpson family. Homer's fingerprints are on the gun. Homer had, by any objective measure, the clearest and most personal motive of anyone in the investigation. Burns had been failing to remember Homer's name for the entirety of their professional relationship, a slight that the show established had been building pressure in Homer for years. Homer is arrested. He is about to be convicted. And then Burns wakes from his coma, looks around the hospital room, and names Maggie. According to Burns' account, he encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting. He tried to take her lollipop. In the ensuing struggle, his gun fell from his holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot, the mystery was solved, or was it? Let's start with the contest, because the contest tells you something important about the relationship between the official answer and the available evidence. Fox promoted the mystery as solvable from part 1. They ran a national contest on that premise. They told the audience that all the necessary information to identify the shooter was available before part 2 aired, and that the winner would be determined by whoever correctly assembled that information into the right answer. Thousands of entries were submitted. The producers reviewed a randomly selected sample of those entries. They looked for the name Maggie Simpson. In the sample they reviewed, nobody had guessed Maggie. Nobody had arrived at the official answer from the available evidence. The prize was awarded to someone chosen at random from the pool. That person had not guessed correctly, so instead of being animated into the show, they received a cash payment. The writers were aware of one person online who had posted the correct answer on a news group on the night the original episode aired. But this person used a college internet account that was no longer active by the time anyone tried to contact them. The producers issued an open invitation for this person to come forward. As far as anyone has been able to determine, they never did. The show designed a mystery, promoted it as solvable, built a national contest around it, and when the answer was revealed, essentially no one in the audience had derived it from the evidence, not in the random sample of thousands of entries. Not through conventional deductive reasoning applied to the clues planted in part 1. Either the clues were insufficient to lead to the answer the writers chose, or the answer did not follow from the evidence in the way the show's promotion implied it would. The sundial is the most significant piece of evidence the show uses to anchor its conclusion, and it is also the piece of evidence that disintegrates most completely when examined. Burns falls. His hands land on W and S, which the show tells us reads as M and S from Burns's own perspective, which stands for Maggie Simpson. This is presented as a dying man's coded identification of his attacker, not a verbal statement, which he was apparently unable to make, but a physical gesture, the hands landing on letters that spelled the answer. Burns himself, when he woke from his coma and was asked about this, was explicit. The positioning of his hands on the sundial was not intentional. He did not arrange himself to spell out anything. He fell. The letters his hands happened to land on were a function of physics and the specific geometry of his collapse, not of any deliberate communication. The central piece of evidence in the greatest mystery in The Simpsons history, the piece of evidence the show built its promotional materials around, the detail that was supposed to anchor the audience's attention during the entire summer of uncertainty, was explicitly disavowed by the victim who was supposed to have produced it as a message. The sundial means nothing, Burns said so himself. Then there is the detail about the gun. Burns carried a gun in a holster. In scenes immediately preceding the shooting, the holster is shown empty. Burns's gun was already missing from his person before the shooting took place. Whoever shot Burns used a weapon they had taken from him, not a weapon they brought with them. The implication of this detail is significant. Most of the suspects at the town meeting arrived armed. They came to the confrontation with weapons because they were angry enough to come prepared for violence. The person who shot Burns was someone who arrived unarmed, who did not plan, when they set out that evening, to shoot anyone, and who encountered Burns's gun in the chaos of the confrontation and used it. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. So do many other people who were at the meeting without their own weapons. Burns's last words before being shot were, on the record, these: "Oh, it's you." Not alarm, not fear, recognition. The kind of recognition you extend to someone familiar, someone you know, someone you have met before, someone whose presence you acknowledge with the mild surprise of an unexpected encounter, rather than the sharp alertness of a threat. Oh, it's you. A greeting, essentially. The greeting of a man who sees someone he knows. Does Mr. Burns know Maggie Simpson? Has he ever, at any point before this episode, had a meaningful interaction with Maggie that would cause him to recognize her on sight, in a dark parking lot, and respond to her presence with comfortable familiarity rather than the complete blank of encountering someone he cannot place? The show does not establish any such relationship. Burns barely recognizes Homer. Homer, who has worked for Burns for decades, who Burns presumably sees at least occasionally in the course of operating the plant that Homer nominally maintains. A baby who has no professional relationship with Burns, whose connection to the plant is entirely secondhand through her father, this baby, Burns sees in a parking lot and responds with warm recognition. The same man who cannot remember the name of his own employee of many years recognizes, in dim light, a baby he has no established relationship with. In season 18, Homer confesses to shooting Mr. Burns. He says it directly, on camera, to another character. He states that he was the one who shot Burns. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens the file. Nobody in Springfield's official or unofficial power structure treats this statement as something that requires a response. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the richest and most powerful man in Springfield, and the show treats it as a throwaway line. Homer might be lying. He might be exaggerating. He might be misremembering events that his damaged, crayon-impaired, radiation-soaked brain has processed in ways that bear minimal resemblance to what actually happened. All of these possibilities are real, and all of them are consistent with Homer's established character. But the confession exists in the canon. It was said, it was not retracted, and it was not investigated. The Marge theory has its own coherence. The argument is built around several observations. Marge is a devoted mother who watched Burns systematically damage the things she cared about most: the school her children attended, the retirement home where family members lived, the dog her children loved. She watched Burns steal the sun from a town where she was trying to build a life. Marge's motive is as substantial as anyone else's. The specific wrinkle in the Marge theory is an episode from an earlier season in which Burns develops an infatuation with Marge. Burns pursued Marge with the particular determination of a man who is not accustomed to being refused. The episode resolved in Marge's favor. She rejected Burns, her marriage survived. But the infatuation was real within the show's timeline. If Burns, shot in the parking lot, looked up and saw Marge, if he recognized the woman he had been infatuated with, the woman he had pursued, the woman he cared about in whatever cold and self-serving way, Burns cares about anything he might have made a choice. The choice to protect her. The choice to point at the sundial instead of at a person's name. The choice to give a dying man's testimony that landed on the most harmless possible answer. Maggie was available. Maggie was at the scene. Maggie could not be prosecuted. Wiggum said so himself. No jury would convict a baby. If someone with enough awareness of the situation and enough reason to protect someone else wanted to close the case cleanly, Maggie was the cleanest available answer. An infant too young to deny the accusation, too young to understand what she was being accused of, too young to ever face any consequence for what she was being credited with. The alternate endings confirm that even the people who made the show did not feel fully settled in the Maggie answer during the production of the resolution. A complete alternate ending was animated, in which Smithers is revealed as the real shooter, fully produced, fully voiced. A finished, complete version of how the mystery could have concluded with a different answer. This ending was shown during a clip show, hosted by Troy McClure, who dismisses it by noting that it would have required ignoring the DNA evidence. He calls ignoring DNA evidence downright nutty. The reference is to the O.J. Simpson trial, which had recently concluded when this clip show aired. A jury in Los Angeles had returned a not guilty verdict in a case that included significant DNA evidence pointing to the defendant's guilt. The jury ignored that evidence. The reference is not subtle. The show is telling you, explicitly, through a fictional character in a metafictional context, that ignoring DNA evidence is a thing that happens, that the official answer is not always the right answer. That evidence can be managed, redirected, made to point wherever the people in power need it to point. An early draft of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers considered this possibility seriously enough that they planned a subsequent story arc in which Barney would be sent to prison as a result. This direction was eventually abandoned, but it lingered long enough in the process that it influenced the shape of the scripts. Multiple shooters were written, developed, animated in alternate form, and eventually set aside before the final answer was locked. The answer was not determined by the clues. The answer was chosen by the writers after the clues were already in place, and the clues were then adjusted to accommodate the chosen answer. The mystery was engineered in reverse. And here is the question that the official answer never fully addresses. Springfield is not a town where a single gunshot is the expected response to extreme provocation. These people riot over trivialities. They form mobs when the situation calls for them, and sometimes when it does not. They burn down buildings. They turn on each other at the slightest escalation. The show has documented this pattern across hundreds of episodes. Burns blocks out the sun. He eliminates the town's access to natural light. He threatens the survival of every living thing in the community that requires sunlight for food production or psychological health or basic biological function. He does this after having already destroyed the school, the retirement home, the bar, and the family dog. And exactly one person fires exactly one shot. In a room full of people who were already carrying weapons, with every possible motive and every possible opportunity. And the one shot that was fired, according to the official record, came from a baby who was not in the meeting room at all. Springfield is not a town that responds to maximum provocation with a single, contained, targeted act of violence. Springfield is a town that responds to maximum provocation by losing its collective mind in every direction simultaneously. The restraint implied by the official account of the Burns shooting does not fit the town the show has documented for 36 years. Maybe someone planned it. Maybe the single shot was not a spontaneous response but a calculated one, executed by someone with access to Burns's schedule, knowledge of the gun, and sufficient motive to move beyond impulse into intention. Someone like Smithers, who was fired that day and knew every detail of Burns's movements. Someone like Homer, who had finally, after years of being ignored, reached a point he could not come back from. Someone like Marge, protecting her family with the specific, terrifying efficiency of a mother who has decided she is done. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The show committed to it. The writers stand behind it. And the DVD commentary treats it as the established fact of the show's canon. But the contest, nobody won. The clue the victim disavowed. The alternate ending that was fully animated. The confession in season 18 that nobody followed up on. The final shot of Maggie alone in the room, checking her surroundings, then performing the motion in private. All of it suggests that the greatest mystery in Simpsons history was not solved. It was closed. In Springfield, those are two very different things. Section 4. How is Mr. Burns still alive? This sounds like it should have a simple answer. He is a fictional character. He is exempt from biological reality by the nature of his existence as a cartoon creation. The rules of mortality do not apply in animation. This is the clean, efficient, uninteresting explanation. But The Simpsons has not been satisfied with uninteresting explanations for 36 years, and the question of Burns's survival is one of the places where the show has built something genuinely strange and genuinely specific. It is not just that Burns is old. The show has established not merely that he is old, but how he remains functional at his age, what infrastructure sustains him, what would happen if that infrastructure were interrupted, and what his continued survival means for the town that both enables and depends on him. The machinery of Burns's immortality is one of the most elaborate pieces of world building in the show's history, and it is all there in the episodes, visible, coherent, and deeply unsettling if you pull it together into a single picture. Let's establish the timeline first, understanding that the floating nature of the show's continuity means that any timeline here is a reconstruction rather than a direct quote from the text. Burns's age has been stated in various forms across many episodes. No single statement gives a definitive birth year, but the aggregate of the references, his personal memories, his described experiences, his relationships with historical figures and events, places his birth somewhere in the latter part of the 19th century. Most interpretations of the available evidence land him in the 1880s, though there are episodes that push the boundary further in either direction. He attended Yale. The context of his Yale years, based on references he makes in multiple episodes, appears to be the very early 20th century. He served in World War II, which ended in 1945. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during that war. He has described personal relationships with historical figures who died in the mid-20th century, Howard Hughes, among others in the past tense and in the first person, as the memories of someone who actually knew them, rather than the knowledge of someone who read about them. By even the most conservative reading of this evidence, Burns is well over 100 years old. The more generous readings push him toward 140. He functions. This is the important part. He is not a man who has survived to an extraordinary age in the specific way that some people survive to great age, which is to say, present but diminished, cognitively fading, physically dependent, living in the way that very old bodies live when they have outlasted most of what they were built to do. Burns is frail physically in ways the show depicts repeatedly. His physical strength is somewhere below minimal. A stiff wind presents a real challenge. A moderate physical effort can exhaust him. But his mind is sharp. This is something the show establishes as consistently as anything else about him. Burns is, by any reasonable measure, the most strategically intelligent character in Springfield. He plans. He schemes. He holds long-term strategies across episodes that require sustained mental effort, detailed memory, and a sophisticated understanding of modern finance, modern law, and modern technology. His plans are often evil and occasionally insane, but they are never stupid. They reflect the operation of a mind that has been working at high capacity for a very long time. Whatever is keeping Burns alive is also keeping his cognition functional. That is not a trivial achievement. That is something specific and deliberate. The Springfield Files gives us the mechanism, embedded in the episode like a piece of exposition that the show chose to present as comedy so the audience would absorb it without fully processing what it meant. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment. The show describes it as intensive, as loaded with chemicals and radiation therapy, as something that places extraordinary demands on the body it is administered to. The evidence for just how demanding it is appears immediately after each session. Burns's body emits visible light. He glows, a pale green glow that is not natural, not decorative, not metaphorical. His body, saturated with whatever the treatment has put into it, produces bioluminescence. The glow fades over the subsequent days as his system processes the treatment. By the end of the 7-day cycle, the treatment's effects have been fully metabolized, and his system has returned to whatever state it was in before. And then the treatment must be administered again, because without it, Burns does not make it to day 8. This is not a medication with a comfortable margin of error. It is not a treatment that needs to happen regularly for general health maintenance in the way that, say, dialysis needs to happen regularly. It is a treatment with a precise deadline. Miss the window by a meaningful amount, and the outcome is unambiguous. The system shuts down. Burns is maintained the way complex machinery is maintained, on a schedule, with precision. Without the option of rescheduling, the treatment involves radiation. The show is not explicit about what exactly the treatment contains, but the radiation connection is clearly established. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into the environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own biological functions. He has become, in a sense, what his plant produces. His body now requires radiation input the way a living thing requires food. Remove that input and the system fails. Burns is not just profiting from nuclear energy. He is running on it. The Three Stooges syndrome scene is one of the show's most memorable and most quoted moments, and it is also one of the most genuinely strange pieces of biological world-building the show has ever offered. Burns visits a doctor for a comprehensive assessment. The doctor delivers the results of his examination, and what he describes is not a manageable set of conditions with appropriate treatments. Burns has every disease known to medical science. Every single one. Simultaneously. Present in his body at the same time, all of them active, none of them in remission. The doctor explains why this does not immediately kill him. All of Burns's diseases are present at the same time, which means they are all competing for the same resources at the same time, which means they are all blocking each other from advancing. The gridlock is complete. No single disease can gain enough ground to progress to the point of lethality, because every other disease is right behind it, pushing against it, preventing it from moving forward. The doctor uses the Three Stooges analogy. 3 people, all trying to squeeze through the same doorway simultaneously. None of them can get through. The doorway is blocked not because anything is blocking it from outside, but because everything is trying to use it at once. Burns is the sickest person in the United States and simultaneously functionally indestructible. Not because he is strong, because he is equally compromised in every possible direction at the same time. The comedy of this scene is real, and the scene earns every laugh it gets. But the radiation theory reads it differently. The disease equilibrium is not a spontaneous biological phenomenon. It is the output of the weekly treatments. The treatments do not cure anything. They manage everything. They keep all of Burns's conditions in perfect balance, equally pressured, none gaining dominance, through the continuous application of whatever the treatment delivers. Burns's body is a nuclear reactor, and his treatments are his control rods. Pull the control rods and the reaction runs away. The diseases stop blocking each other. One of them, one of the dozens, the hundreds, the full catalog of every illness medical science has cataloged gains the ground it needs and kills him within 7 days. Smithers understands this. Not necessarily in these terms, not necessarily with this specific technical framework, but he understands that the treatment schedule is not optional, that Burns's health is the sum of its maintenance, and that his departure from his role as Burns's scheduler and caretaker is effectively a death sentence. Not for himself, for Burns. Smithers manages the schedule. Smithers ensures every appointment is kept. Smithers monitors Burns's physical condition with the vigilance of someone who knows that missing a data point is not an inconvenience. It is the beginning of a 7-day countdown. The show has established repeatedly that without Smithers, Burns would not survive. Smithers is not just loyal. He is, functionally, the most important component of Burns's survival infrastructure. The human piece of the maintenance system. The one who makes sure the calendar is correct and the appointments are kept and the control rods are adjusted on schedule. Smithers is not devoted to Burns out of love alone. He is devoted because he knows with whatever level of consciousness this knowledge has reached that his absence is a specific kind of murder. Burns's connection to historical events adds texture to the question of how he has survived this long and what the nature of his survival actually is. The show has depicted him as having been personally present at an extraordinary number of historical moments. He knew Howard Hughes, describing the relationship in the past tense of someone who actually knew him. He served in World War II in a capacity the show deliberately declines to specify precisely, with strong implications that his service was not on the right side of the conflict's moral ledger. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the government during the war and hid it for decades, the kind of act that requires both the longevity to wait for the right moment to use it and the confidence that the moment will eventually come. He has described the Gilded Age, the late 19th century period of extraordinary American industrial wealth, as personal experience, not as history, as the era in which he formed some of his most foundational impressions about how power works and what it is for. He has described Springfield's early history not as something he knows from records, but as something he remembers. And his family, the Burns dynasty, extends further back than Burns himself. The show has depicted the family's wealth and influence as predating the Industrial Revolution, predating the structures that Burns has spent his extraordinary lifespan building and extending. They were powerful before the mechanisms of industrial capitalism that Burns eventually mastered even existed. Whatever the Burns family was and did in the centuries before Burns himself took control, it was sufficient to generate the foundation on which he has built everything since. The question the show leaves unanswered deliberately, consistently, with the patience of a show that knows which doors to leave closed, is whether Burns is an anomaly within his own family, or whether the dynasty has always found ways to extend its patriarchs' lifespans beyond what biology normally allows. If radiation keeps the current Burns functional, what kept the Burns family of 1,820 functional? What did they use before nuclear technology existed? What arrangements did they make? What prices did they pay? What remains of those arrangements in the structure of how Burns operates today? The show does not say, but it does establish that the Burns family has maintained continuous control of its accumulated power for longer than most American institutions have existed. That kind of continuity does not arrive through ordinary generational succession and good luck. It requires either extraordinary measures across every generation or a single extraordinary individual who has lived through all the generations. Burns and Death have had a relationship across the show's run that is unlike any other character's. He has been shot. He has been hospitalized more times than any other character in Springfield. He has collapsed, been attacked, fallen, been poisoned, been abandoned in wilderness conditions that should have been fatal, been subjected to physical experiences that his frail body should not be able to survive. And every time, he comes back. Not through Homer's kind of resilience, which is passive and somewhat miraculous. Homer survives because the narrative needs him to survive, and the show does not offer a mechanical explanation. Burns survives because the machinery of survival, the money, the medical staff, the facilities, the infrastructure of a life specifically organized around the goal of continuing is always available. There is always someone standing by with the resources to do whatever needs to be done. Homer's survival is a cartoon given. Burns's survival is an achievement. He worked for it. He spent a century building the systems that ensure it continues. And the difference between these two modes of survival tells you something important about what money actually is at the level Burns operates at. Money at the level of Burns's wealth is a buffer against consequence. Every risk that would be fatal for an ordinary person is merely manageable for someone with Burns's resources. Every condition that would be terminal in a normal body is treatably chronic for someone with access to Burns's medical infrastructure. The gap between Burns and mortality is not a matter of luck or biology. It is a matter of expenditure. It is the product of a century of systematic investment in the specific goal of not dying. Homer's immortality, in the context of the show, is passive. Burns's immortality is engineered. Every dollar spent, every institution corrupted, every politician owned, every doctor retained, every pharmaceutical research program funded, all of it in service of a single objective. Keep Burns alive, keep the treatments coming, keep the diseases balanced, keep the reactor running. The scariest part of the Burns immortality theory is not that he might be functionally immortal. It is that Springfield requires him to be. The town's economy depends on the power plant. The power plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on the treatments. The treatments depend on the infrastructure Burns's wealth provides. It is a closed loop, self-sustaining, each element dependent on all the others, with no exit and no resolution except the end of the whole system at once. Springfield cannot kill Burns because Springfield cannot survive without Burns. And Burns cannot die because dying would mean the loop finally breaking, and everything the loop has been sustaining, including the contamination, the violations, the three-eyed fish, the cracked cooling towers, the yellow skin of every person living in the dome, would finally have to be acknowledged and addressed. He is not immortal. He is too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying that cost for as long as Burns keeps the lights on, which, if the treatment schedule holds, is indefinitely. Section 5. The Principal and the Pauper Springfield's Collective Denial. There is one episode of The Simpsons that has been ranked among its worst by fans, critics, and even some of the people who made it. An episode that the actor who voices its central character publicly stated his displeasure with. An episode that is consistently cited as the moment the show stopped respecting its own continuity, the moment the writers betrayed the trust of an audience that had been with them for years. Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper. It aired the 28th of September, 1997. The backlash was immediate, sharp, and has not fully subsided in the 28 years since. But here is the question that the consistent ranking of this episode as a failure obscures. What if it is not a failure? What if it is the most honest, most precisely observed, most accurate episode the show ever produced? What if the fans have been reading the betrayal backwards, taking an episode that told the truth about Springfield as a violation of Springfield's rules, when the truth is that Springfield's rules are exactly what the episode was anatomizing? Here is what happens in the episode. Springfield Elementary holds a formal celebration of Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. It is a warm occasion, appropriately attended, marked by the specific kind of institutional appreciation that 20-year anniversaries generate. Skinner has been in the show since its early seasons. He is a known quantity. The audience has spent years with him, with his strained relationship to authority, his complicated dynamic with his mother Agnes, his ongoing low-grade war with Bart Simpson, his professional relationship with Superintendent Chalmers that exists in a perpetual state of tension and mutual dependence. A stranger walks into the celebration. A man who looks different from the character the show has established. He introduces himself in a way that cannot be accommodated within the existing narrative without completely restructuring what the audience knows. He says his name is Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a Vietnam War veteran, captured as a prisoner of war, believed dead for decades. He was not dead. He survived the prison camp. He escaped. He came home. He came home to find someone else living his life. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner for 20 years is Armin Tamzarian. His background, as the episode establishes it, is specific and detailed. He grew up on the margins of society. Small-time criminal, petty offenses, A young man with no prospects and no stable identity, and no one who considered his presence particularly important. He was drafted into the military. He served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed in action, Tamzarian traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of his death to Skinner's mother, Agnes. Agnes needed her son. When Tamzarian arrived at her door, she looked at him and saw who she needed to see. Or perhaps she only needed someone to perform that role, and Tamzarian was there, and the performance seemed possible. Tamzarian went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He assumed the name, the rank, the family, the history, the identity. He built a career inside it. He spent 20 years as the principal of Springfield Elementary, raising a professional life, building a relationship with Agnes, participating in the community as someone he was not, until the real Skinner walked through the gymnasium door. The revelation is handled with honesty. Both men are present. The truth is established clearly and verifiably. Every person in Springfield who attends the subsequent community meeting knows the full story. The imposter is the imposter. The real man is the real man. The facts are unambiguous. And then the town votes, not on whether to pursue legal action against Tamzarian for identity fraud and 2 decades of deception. Not on how to support the real Skinner in reclaiming his name and his history. The town votes on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The vote is unanimous. They choose the lie. The actual legal mechanism of this choice is extraordinary and worth spending a moment with. Judge Snyder, a sitting judicial officer, issues a formal legal decree. The decree establishes, by order of the court, that Tamzarian is the real Skinner. Not that Tamzarian will henceforth be accepted as Skinner out of community preference. Not that Tamzarian will be granted a legal name change. The decree asserts as legal fact that Tamzarian is the original, authentic Seymour Skinner, despite the real Seymour Skinner being physically present in the courtroom. The real Skinner, the man whose identity was stolen, the veteran who survived a POW camp and came home to find his own life occupied by someone else, is tied to a railroad car and physically removed from Springfield. And the judge explicitly criminalizes any future reference to the truth. It is illegal, under penalty of torture, to mention any of this ever again. Let that settle. A town collectively decided that a comfortable lie was more valuable than an uncomfortable truth. They had the proof. They had the real man in the room. They chose, unanimously and formally, with all the apparatus of civic and judicial process, to exile the truth and make its memory a criminal act. Fans called this terrible writing. Some of them still do. Their objection is real and understandable. Everything the audience had invested in the Skinner character, his Vietnam service, his relationship with Agnes, his whole history retroactively became a fiction. The show seemed to be saying that years of audience attachment were based on something that never happened, and doing it without narrative justification adequate to the damage. But the objection, as valid as it is from a storytelling craft perspective, misses what the episode is doing at the level of social observation. The episode is completely honest about what Springfield is. It says clearly, with full narrative commitment, what the show has been showing in softer form for years. Springfield has always operated exactly this way. Every time the town has experienced a catastrophe and then forgotten it by the next episode, every reset, every global amnesia, every erasure of consequences between installments. The episode has been depicting something that this episode finally shows you clearly. Springfield does not forget because its residents are stupid. Springfield does not forget because of radiation damage, though that may be contributing. Springfield forgets because forgetting is the town's collective strategy for survival, deployed deliberately and enforced socially, in the same way that the vote in the Principal and the Pauper was deployed deliberately and enforced legally. Before this episode, the mechanism was invisible. The resets happened off-screen. The amnesia was passive. Nothing drew attention to the fact that a choice was being made. It just appeared that the show had moved on, as shows do, without tracking consequences between episodes. The Principal and the Pauper is the one episode where the show let the audience watch the mechanism operate in real time. It showed the vote, it showed the decree, it showed the railroad car. It did not let the transition happen quietly in the space between episodes. It staged it in the middle of the episode, in front of the audience, with all the ceremony and formality of an actual civic event. And the audience, accustomed to those transitions happening invisibly, experienced this one as a violation. because seeing the mechanism is disturbing. The mechanism should stay invisible. When you can see it, when it is staged as an event with witnesses and a judge and a decree and a railroad car, you have to acknowledge that a choice is being made. You can no longer tell yourself that things just worked out, that the town naturally moved on, that forgetting is the organic outcome of time passing. You have to see the decision, and the decision is terrible. Consider how many catastrophes Springfield has absorbed and then erased from its collective memory across the run of the show. The town has been physically destroyed and reconstructed. It has been sealed under a federal dome as an environmental containment measure. It has survived nuclear near misses that by any realistic assessment should have generated lasting consequences for the facility involved. It has been invaded, flooded, subjected to weather events of extraordinary severity. Structures that should have altered the economic and social geography of the town permanently have been repaired or replaced between episodes, with no reference to how or why. Burns has been shot, has gone to a coma, has recovered, has continued operating the plant. Events that should be permanently formative, that should have generated investigations and legal proceedings and lasting changes in how Springfield operates, simply did not. The conventional explanation is episodic storytelling. Shows that run for a long time cannot sustain serialized continuity the way shorter-form narratives can. The audience comes back each week for a new story, not for the continuation of the previous one, and the format requires that each episode begin from a stable baseline. This is an accurate description of how the show was made. But The Principal and the Pauper offers the in-world explanation. Springfield resets because the community chooses to reset. Through the same mechanism depicted in the episode, a collective agreement that the catastrophe did not define them, that the official version of reality is preferable to the actual one, that anyone who insists on accuracy is a problem to be managed rather than a voice to be heard. This is not unique to Springfield. It is the psychology of actual communities, particularly small ones with tight social networks and significant dependencies on shared narratives. Small towns have a documented capacity for collective amnesia. Scandals get buried under social consensus. Uncomfortable truths about community leaders get progressively softened over years, until the softened version is the only one in active circulation. Crimes get attributed to external forces. The community's investment in its own coherence is strong enough to override its investment in accuracy. What makes the Springfield version particularly stark is the explicitness, the vote, the decree, the railroad car. These are not subtle social processes operating at the level of unspoken agreement. They are explicit civic acts. The community did not just quietly stop talking about the truth. It formally outlawed the truth and removed its carrier. The show has a theory for why this is necessary, and it is one that every other major theory we have discussed tonight connects to. If Springfield genuinely confronted the truth about itself, if the collective amnesia were replaced by collective attention, the cascade of consequences would be unsustainable. If they remembered the dome, they would have to acknowledge the pollution that caused the dome to be necessary. Acknowledging the pollution means confronting the source of the pollution. Confronting the source of the pollution means confronting Burns. Confronting Burns means threatening the economic infrastructure that the entire town depends on. Threatening that infrastructure means the town stops functioning. And the town stopping functioning means the specific form of life that Springfield represents, imperfect, contaminated, built on a series of ongoing denials, but also in some ways genuinely communal, genuinely human, genuinely warm, comes to an end. So they do not confront it. They vote to not confront it. They make not confronting it legally binding. They exile anyone who would make confrontation necessary. This is presented as civic dysfunction, and it is. But it is also, at the deepest level, a community making the only survival choice available to it, given its actual circumstances. They are not wrong, within the logic of their situation, to protect the shared fiction. The shared fiction is load-bearing. Remove it, and what remains is not a more honest Springfield. What remains is just Springfield without the denial that keeps it running. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary. He arrived with proof that the official story was built on a lie. He had every right to that proof. He was the victim of the lie. He deserved to have his identity restored. And the town's response was not justice. It was exile. That is not a comedy beat. That is not a flaw in the episode's logic. That is the show telling you, with complete honesty, exactly what kind of place Springfield is. If the coma theory is true, this episode acquires one more layer of meaning, sitting underneath all the others like a final weight. If everything since season 4 is Homer's dream, if Springfield is the product of an unconscious man's mind generating a simulation of the world he loved, then Homer's dreaming mind built an episode in which an entire community votes to sustain a fiction because the fiction is more livable than the truth. Homer needs this validation. He needs to believe that stolen identities can be made real through collective agreement. He needs to believe that the fake life, maintained long enough and believed deeply enough by everyone who matters, becomes indistinguishable from the real one. Because Homer's coma is exactly that. A fake life sustained by a dreaming mind that cannot let the real one resume. A simulation maintained past its warranty. A fiction that the dreamer has voted, unanimously, to treat as truth, and that has made it illegal, in whatever way dreams make things illegal, to remember anything different. Armin Tamzarian is still pretending to be Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. Homer is still dreaming, and the real Seymour Skinner is on that train, moving away from his own life, carrying in his honest hands the truth that no one in Springfield will allow themselves to hear. The Principal and the Pauper is not the worst Simpsons episode, it is the most important one. Because it is the only episode that shows you, in full daylight, the infrastructure of Springfield's impossible reality. The machinery that makes every reset possible. The social contract that allows a contaminated town to behave as though it is healthy, a population of mutations to call themselves normal, a man in a coma to call himself awake. The low-temperature denial, how Springfield really forgets. We spent considerable time with the Principal and the Pauper episode, but there is a dimension to Springfield's relationship with inconvenient truth that the episode only begins to describe. The vote to keep the lie, the legal decree criminalizing the truth, the expulsion of the real Seymour Skinner, these are dramatic and explicit gestures. But the more insidious version of Springfield's denial operates at a much lower temperature, and it is the low-temperature version that the show has been depicting, steadily and without fanfare, for its entire run. Consider how many times the following sequence has occurred in The Simpsons. Something catastrophic happens. The episode builds to a crisis. The crisis is resolved not necessarily well, not necessarily cleanly, but resolved enough that the characters can exhale. The episode ends. The next episode begins, and the catastrophe is gone. Not referenced, not built upon, not even registered as a memory by any of the characters whose lives it disrupted. Fans call this episodic storytelling. They call it cartoon logic. They call it the reset button. These are accurate descriptions of the production choice. But the fan theories that have accrued around this pattern have, over time, built a different kind of explanation, one that treats the reset not as a creative convenience but as a feature of the world. Springfield resets because Springfield has learned to reset. The residents have developed, through years of exposure to a reality that cannot be sustained if examined closely, an institutional capacity for forgetting that operates at both the individual and the collective level. At the individual level, this looks like Homer not connecting the dots. Homer knows at various points in the show's run that Mr. Burns has done things that should make continued employment impossible. He knows that his own mother was driven underground by the man whose checks he cashes. He knows that the plant is dangerous. He knows that the town's water has done something to the fish. He has this knowledge, and he does not build anything from it. The knowledge sits in him without generating action, without generating connection, without building toward the kind of understanding that would require him to do something difficult. The radiation theory explains this as cognitive damage. The coma theory explains it as the dreams need to keep him employed, housed, and in place. But there is a third explanation that does not require either. Homer has learned, in the specific way that people learn things without articulating them, that building toward understanding is dangerous. That knowing too much, connecting too many dots, following a line of thought to its conclusion, leads somewhere uncomfortable. And uncomfortable places are places he cannot afford to go, because he is a man who has spent his entire life managing the discomfort of a foundational loss, and adding more discomfort to that load would be unsupportable. Homer forgets because remembering costs too much. Not in the sense of cognitive effort, but in the sense of emotional exposure. Every thread that he does not pull is a thread that leads, somewhere at its end, to a version of his own life that he cannot bear to see clearly. At the collective level, Springfield's forgetting operates through the same social mechanism that the principal and the pauper makes explicit, but that runs quietly through the fabric of every other episode. The town maintains an agreed-upon version of reality by collectively directing its attention away from the features of that reality that would require action. The three-eyed fish is the best example. Blinky appears. The episode treats Blinky as significant as a symbol, as evidence, as the kind of thing that a functioning civic society would respond to with investigation and concern. The gubernatorial candidate tries to build a political movement around Blinky. Burns is required to eat the fish on television to demonstrate its safety. There is, for a brief episode, the suggestion that the contamination evidence might actually produce consequences. And then it doesn't. Burns eats the fish, the candidate loses. The town moves on. Blinky disappears from the narrative and is never followed up on. No water testing, no longitudinal study, no policy changes. The three-eyed fish was a story for the duration of the episode that contained it, and then the story ended, and Springfield collectively agreed that the story had ended. This is not unique to fictional communities. The show has always been aware that what it was depicting in Springfield was not fantasy. The pattern of collective denial of communities choosing not to examine the evidence of their own contamination, of political processes being successfully managed by those with the most to lose from honest examination, of individual knowledge existing without ever converting into collective action, is a pattern that runs through the history of real American communities that have lived in the shadow of industrial facilities. The sociological literature on environmental contamination in working-class American towns is, if you read it, deeply compatible with everything the theories describe about Springfield. Communities that knew, at some level, that something was wrong, that had evidence in their immediate environment in the health of their neighbors, in the behavior of local wildlife, in the particular color of certain waterways that something was not right. And that continued, for years or decades, to find ways not to act on that evidence. Because acting would mean disrupting the economic structure that the community depended on. Because acting would mean confronting powerful interests that had demonstrated their willingness and capacity to make life difficult for those who challenged them. Because acting would mean admitting that the normal life being lived in that community was not as safe as it appeared. Springfield is a cartoon, but Springfield is drawn from life. Section 6. Maggie Simpson, the most dangerous person in Springfield. 1 year old. 1 year old for 36 years. She does not talk. She does not walk without sometimes falling. She communicates through the particular rhythms of a pacifier and the remarkable expressiveness of eyes that seem, sometimes, to be containing significantly more than any infant's eyes should contain. She sits in a crib or in a high chair or in a stroller, and she watches, she absorbs, she processes, she says nothing. And in 36 years of silence, Maggie Simpson has accomplished more than almost any other character in the show's history. She shot a billionaire. The evidence for this, as we have discussed, is genuinely contested. But the official record says Maggie did it, and even the contested reading of the evidence requires her to have been present and involved in whatever actually happened in that parking lot. She led a successful daycare rebellion against an authoritarian caretaker who had implemented a regime of psychological oppression specifically designed to crush independent thought in children under the age of 2. She has saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations through timely, decisive action that her family was not positioned to take themselves. She demonstrated in a theatrical short film that received an Academy Award nomination problem-solving abilities that would be remarkable in an adult and are essentially incomprehensible in someone who cannot reliably walk. She has been tested and found to possess intelligence that the available instruments cannot fully capture because the instruments were designed to measure a range that her results exceed. She has done all of this without saying a word that she did not choose to say. And she has done it while everyone around her, her family, her town, the Springfield power structure, the Springfield medical and educational establishments has looked at her and seen a baby, passive, precognitive, helpless, dependent, not a subject of serious attention. That is not accidental. That is precisely how she designed it. Let's start with the moment at the end of the Burns shooting episode, because it contains more information per second than almost anything else the show has ever depicted. The investigation is over. The verdict has been delivered. Everyone has left the room. Maggie is alone. The camera finds her, and what follows is 3 seconds of behavior that, examined carefully, represents a complete dismantling of the assumption that Maggie is what she appears to be. She looks around the room. This is the first thing. She does not simply sit there in the aftermath. She actively surveys her environment. She turns her head, she checks, she confirms that no one is present. This is not a baby's reflexive movement. This is the behavior of someone who has identified observation as a variable to manage and is managing it. She wants to know whether anyone is watching. She needs to know before she does what she is about to do. When she has confirmed that she is alone, she moves her pacifier. The motion she makes mimics, with precision, the motion of squeezing a trigger. Not a vague general baby mouth movement. A specific, deliberate motion that corresponds to a specific action she either performed or witnessed. That sequence requires a specific stack of cognitive abilities. First, memory. She is remembering an action that happened earlier. Second, significance. She understands that this action was important, that it had consequences, that it means something. Third, social awareness. She has determined that this action should not be performed publicly. Fourth, patience. She waited until she was alone to perform it. Fifth, execution. She performed it correctly, deliberately, with the form intact. These are not the capabilities of an infant. They are the capabilities of someone who understands what they are doing, what it means, why some things should be done where no one can see, and how to produce the conditions in which those things can be done safely. Maggie is 1 year old and she has already mastered the concept of the private performance. In 2012, a 7-minute theatrical short was released under the Simpsons banner, The Longest Daycare. It received an Academy Award nomination. 7 minutes, no dialogue from any character who matters, and one of the most complete portraits of Maggie that the show has ever offered. The setting is a daycare center, the Ayn Rand School for Tots, named with the show's characteristic specificity of satirical target. It is run with the efficiency and warmth of a high-security sorting facility. The children are assessed on arrival and placed into groups based on their observed potential, with those found to be of limited promise herded into a windowless room and left with blocks. Maggie, despite her known extraordinary intelligence, is assessed and placed with the general population. This is the first indication that the facility's assessment process has a significant flaw, which is that its assessors do not know how to recognize the kind of intelligence Maggie has, because Maggie has spent her entire existence making sure they cannot. Inside the facility, Maggie finds a caterpillar in the process of building a chrysalis. She identifies it, she understands what it is doing. She understands, based on this identification, what it will become and what threats that transformation process faces in an environment managed by people who do not value things that are in the process of becoming something. A baby named Gerald the unibrow baby, who has been Maggie's recurring counterforce across the show's history, identifies the caterpillar as something to destroy. He is bigger. He is present in the same space. He has, in the context of this short film, the institutional backing of an environment that does not particularly encourage the protection of fragile things. What follows is a sustained, sophisticated operation. Maggie observes the environment first. She does not act immediately upon identifying the problem. She maps the space. She identifies the relevant obstacles, Gerald's movements, the staff's patrol patterns, the physical layout of the facility's safety systems. She builds a picture of the problem that includes not just the immediate threat but the conditions that produce and sustain the threat. Then she acts. The operation she runs is multi-step. It requires timing, spatial reasoning, the ability to predict other characters' behavior with sufficient accuracy to create windows for action. It requires improvisation when her initial approach is blocked. It requires the management of multiple variables simultaneously. Where Gerald is, where the staff are, where the chrysalis is, what resources are available, what approach has the best odds of success given the current configuration. She executes all of this with an infant's body. She falls. She stumbles. Her motor control is the motor control of someone who has been walking when walking is possible at all for less than a year. Her physical limitations are constant and real, but her decision-making compensates for every physical constraint. Every choice she makes in the course of the operation is the correct choice. There is no lucky stumble, no accident that saves her. There is only a plan, executed correctly, by someone who built the plan while taking accurate stock of every relevant variable. She succeeds. The butterfly escapes, the operation is complete. And Maggie returns to the appearance of a passive, precognitive infant, waiting to be collected by her mother at the end of the day. Now think about Lisa. Maggie has spent her entire existence, every moment of awareness she has had in close proximity to Lisa Simpson. She has had a front row seat to Lisa's experience as the most intelligent person in the Simpson household, and by extension, one of the most intelligent people in Springfield. She has watched Lisa navigate the world with her intelligence worn visibly, demonstrated consistently, offered up to everyone around her as both a gift and a claim, and she has watched what that gets Lisa. The isolation is real. The loneliness is real. The frustration of being the smartest person in a room that does not value intelligence, that actively resists the discomfort that intelligence sometimes produces, that finds the person who asks the right questions to be more troublesome than useful. Maggie has watched this experience play out across her sister's life with the attentiveness of someone who is very quietly taking notes. Lisa speaks up and gets dismissed. Lisa challenges authority and faces the institutional response that authority deploys against challenges. Lisa tries to improve things and discovers that the things she is trying to improve have constituencies who prefer them as they are. The specific form of Lisa's intelligence, explicit, verbal, confrontational, unwilling to pretend not to know things, is the form that produces the maximum amount of friction with a community organized around not examining itself. Maggie watched this. She watched her sister fight every day with everything she had and receive in return the steady accumulation of small defeats that characterize the experience of being right in a context that punishes rightness. She saw what visible intelligence costs in Springfield, and she made a different decision. She decided that the power is in the silence, that invisibility is more durable armor than any argument, that the less she is noticed, the more she can accomplish, that if she maintains the appearance of exactly what everyone expects a baby to be, helpless, passive, precognitive, a background element in the household's daily operation, the household will run around her without interfering with whatever she is actually doing. Every remarkable thing Maggie has ever done happened below the radar. The Burns shooting investigation focused on every adult in Springfield and eventually ended on a baby. The daycare rebellion succeeded because the facility's security was designed to prevent children from leaving, not to detect them organizing inside. Every heroic act, every demonstration of capability, every moment where Maggie's intelligence applied itself to a problem that adults had failed to solve happened in the margins, in the spaces where no one was looking, and Maggie has made sure, consistently and deliberately, that no one is looking. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence in several episodes. The results vary depending on the episode's needs, but the pattern is consistent. When the test results are positive, when they indicate something extraordinary, the family absorbs this information as a pleasant surprise and then moves on. Nobody follows up. Nobody asks what it means for how they should be treating her, what expectations are appropriate, what she might need or want. The extraordinary result is noted and then filed away in the same category as every other extraordinary Maggie moment. Interesting, impressive, and ultimately not something that requires a structural response. Because who has time? Homer is having a disaster. Bart has done something. Lisa is on a crusade. The household revolves around visible, vocal, explicitly demanding expressions of need and personality. And in the center of that rotation, quiet as a stone, sits the one who watches everything and says nothing and waits. Connect this to the radiation theory and the picture becomes strange in a new way. If Springfield's contamination produces mutations, and if those mutations express differently in different bodies, then the Simpson family might represent the full spectrum of that expression. The same environmental exposure, the same contaminated water and irradiated air, producing different outcomes in different genetic profiles. Homer is one end of the spectrum. His mutation reduced his cognitive capacity, added to the specific impairment of a foreign object in his brain, and the accumulated damage of decades of direct proximity to the reactor, His mutation produced a man who cannot hold two pieces of information in his mind simultaneously and see the relationship between them. Maggie is the other end. Her mutation amplified something, took whatever was there at baseline and pushed it beyond what measurement can capture. The same source, the same irradiated environment, but through the particular chemistry of her biology, it gave rather than took. Homer and Maggie are the two poles of the same radioactive effect. The father and the youngest child, separated by the full range of what the contamination is capable of. He is what happens when mutation takes something away. She is what happens when it gives something it had no business giving. If the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius is something more personal than a mutation. Homer went to sleep in April 1993. Maggie was 1 year old. He did not watch her grow up. He did not see her walk, hear her develop language, observe the particular person she became across the years he was absent. The dream cannot supply what the dreamer has never observed. It cannot give Homer a Maggie who is older, more verbal, more physically capable, because Homer does not have those images. He has only the 1 year old he was putting to sleep in her crib the last morning he was awake. But the dream can give her something else. The dream can give her the full expression of everything she might become, compressed into the body she has. The dream can make her capable of things no actual 1 year old has ever been capable of, because the dream is not bound by what is real. It is bound only by what Homer needs. And what Homer needs, lying in that hospital bed with no way to know what is happening to his family, is to believe that his youngest child will be all right without him, that she does not need his protection, that she is, in whatever way is possible for her, capable of meeting whatever comes. So the dream makes her extraordinary, gives her an intelligence that transcends her developmental stage, makes her the protector rather than the protected, places her, quietly and invisibly, as the most capable member of the family, not because mutation made her this way, because a father, lying in the dark, needed to believe his daughter would be okay. Her genius, in the coma reading, is a prayer. It is the most loving thing Homer's unconscious mind has ever produced. The specific wish of a man who cannot be there for his child, manifested as the child's invulnerability. What is Maggie waiting for? The show has never answered this question. It is the only question about any member of the Simpson family that remains genuinely open, because Maggie's future has never been depicted in any flash-forward, never extrapolated in any what-if episode in a way that feels definitive. We have seen adult Bart, we have seen adult Lisa. We have been given, in various forms, the shape of their eventual trajectories. Maggie remains opaque, behind the pacifier, behind those enormous watching eyes, behind 36 years of deliberate, chosen, strategically maintained silence. We know what she is capable of. We have seen the shooting. We have seen the daycare rebellion. We have seen the longest daycare. We have seen every moment where the family needed someone to act, and the someone who acted was the one nobody was watching. We know she is waiting. The behavior is too consistent, too patient, too long sustained to be anything other than deliberate. She is not silent because she cannot speak. She is silent because she has decided not to. That decision was made at some level of awareness, and it has been maintained for 36 years. Something is thinking. Behind that pacifier, something is watching the family and the town and the cracked cooling towers, and the billionaire who glows in the dark, and the community that votes to exile the truth. Something is absorbing all of it, filing all of it, keeping it in whatever extraordinary storage capacity her extraordinary brain provides. When Maggie decides that the moment has arrived when she breaks her silence and acts with the full weight of everything she has been holding, Springfield will not be prepared for it. That is exactly how she designed it. Section 7. The Simpsons Predictions Phenomenon. Did the writers see the future, or did the future follow the show? There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a room when someone mentions the predictions. You already know what I mean. Most people who have spent any time with The Simpsons online have encountered the meme, the screenshot, the side-by-side image with a timestamp that says something like, "They predicted this in 1994. And the first time you see it, you feel something strange. A small, cool recognition that the world might be a little more patterned than you thought. A faint suggestion that either the writers of an animated comedy were unusually prescient, or that the world has been following some kind of script that nobody gave you a copy of. The predictions are real. That part is not a rumor. The show has, at various points and with varying degrees of exactness, appeared to foresee events that happened years or even decades after the original episode aired. Some of the matches are so precise that dismissing them entirely requires a little more effort than most skeptical frameworks are set up for. And some of them, when you look closely, turn out to be less magical than they seemed, but no less interesting for that. Tonight we are going to take the predictions seriously. Not in the sense of believing that the writers had special access to the future, but in the sense that something real is happening when a piece of fiction anticipates reality that closely, and it is worth understanding what that something is. Let's start with the most famous one. In a 2000 episode called Bart to the Future, the show depicts a flash forward to the year 2030. Lisa Simpson has become president of the United States, and in a brief throwaway line, she inherits what she describes as a budget crisis left behind by her predecessor who is named as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Donald Trump was elected president of the United States in 2016. When screenshots from this episode began circulating after the election, the internet's reaction fell somewhere between astonishment and conspiracy. The writer of that episode, Dan Greeny, gave an interview in which he explained the choice. Trump had been, at that point, a cartoonishly recognizable figure of excessive wealth and celebrity ego, and using his name as a shorthand for a disastrous presidency was meant as a joke. The joke was that someone so obviously unsuited to serious governance might nonetheless end up there. It was a satirical exaggeration meant to seem absurd. It didn't stay absurd. Greeny said he found the episode's eventual accuracy troubling, not amusing. That is worth sitting with. The writer who imagined it was not delighted by the confirmation. There is something in that reaction that points toward what the predictions actually are. They are satirical extrapolations. They are the writers asking themselves, in a particular way, if the world keeps moving in this direction, where does it end up? And sometimes the world obliges. But there are predictions that don't fit that frame as neatly. In 1994, an episode showed Homer using a device that looks and functions almost exactly like a tablet computer, a flat, touch-responsive screen used for communication and media consumption. The iPad would not be released for another 16 years. In this case, it is harder to argue that the writers were following a cultural trend to its logical conclusion, because in 1994, the concept of mass-market personal touchscreen devices was not widely circulating in public discourse. The writers were imagining a convenience, something that would make Homer's lazy lifestyle even lazier, and the technology industry eventually built it. In 1995, an episode called Lisa's Wedding depicted Lisa at college in the year 2010. In the episode, she makes a phone call on a device that is recognizably a smartwatch worn on the wrist, used for communication. The Apple Watch would arrive in 2015. The episode's smartwatch is not exactly the same device, but the concept a communication device worn on the wrist as an extension of a person's technological identity is there in clear detail. In 1998, an episode satirized a voting machine that registers a vote for one candidate and awards it to another. This was treated as an absurd joke about the corruption and dysfunction of electoral machinery. In the years following, documented cases of voting machine errors in American elections would appear with uncomfortable regularity. In 2012, an episode called Them, Robot depicted a scenario in which workers are replaced entirely by automated robots, with one human employee kept on as a legal or regulatory necessity. The episode was played as comedy. The economic anxiety around automation replacing human labor has, in the decades since, become one of the defining concerns of the modern workforce. The list continues. Faulty autocorrect. Video calls as a standard part of daily life. A specific instance of a country winning a particular number of gold medals at the Olympics that matched the eventual real result. A reference to a hamburger earmuffs product that someone actually manufactured. A horse winning a particular race. Specific news events rendered in cartoon form before they happened. At a certain point, the volume becomes notable. The show has aired for over 35 years. It has produced more than 750 episodes. The sheer quantity of material means that something in the range of 18 to 20,000 individual jokes, scenarios, and throwaway references have been generated. Probability alone suggests that some percentage of those would eventually match something in the real world. A show that has imagined enough futures will, by simple arithmetic, get some of them right. This is the most rigorous explanation, and it is correct as far as it goes. But the rigorous explanation doesn't fully dissolve the feeling. Because the predictions that resonate most are not random noise, they tend to cluster around specific themes. Specifically, technology, political dysfunction, corporate overreach, media saturation, and the particular shape of American cultural decline. These are not random topics. They are the themes The Simpsons has returned to, with great consistency and considerable insight, for its entire run. The show has always been about what happens when the promises of American life start to fray at the edges, and the events it has appeared to predict are almost always events that fit that same pattern, which suggests that the predictions are not accidents of probability. They are the natural byproduct of paying close attention to the mechanisms of a culture over a very long time. There is a particular type of intelligence that comes from sustained observation. A doctor who has treated thousands of patients develops an intuition about what a certain combination of symptoms means before the test results confirm it. A weather forecaster who has studied a particular region for decades knows the signs that don't show up in the models. A satirist who has spent 35 years examining the same cultural landscape from the same thoughtful angle accumulates a refined model of how that landscape changes over time. The Simpsons writers at their best were practitioners of this kind of accumulated observational intelligence. They were not predicting the future so much as understanding the present with unusual clarity. And when you understand the present with unusual clarity, the future becomes somewhat more legible. Consider the Trump prediction again from this angle. The joke wasn't random. It came from a specific perception that American celebrity culture and political culture had become so intertwined that the barriers between them were dissolving. That the logic of entertainment recognizability, spectacle, name value, was increasingly the logic by which political power was acquired and maintained. The writers saw that mechanism clearly in 2000. They followed it to one possible destination. The destination, it turned out, was real. The tablet computer prediction is different in kind. It is harder to explain as cultural extrapolation, and this is where the predictions get genuinely mysterious. The writers were not drawing on a cultural trend in 1994. They were imagining convenience in a way that happened to match exactly what engineers and designers would eventually produce. This is closer to what we might call creative resonance, the imagination landing on a solution space that the material world would later independently occupy. Cultures dream of their own futures. They produce images and stories that act as templates, as aspirations, as blueprints. Sometimes the people who make those images are conscious of it, and sometimes they are not. The technology industry has, for decades, drawn heavily on science fiction for its aesthetics and ambitions. The people who built the first personal computers were often explicitly inspired by the computers they had read about in novels. The people who designed the user interfaces of early smartphones were working in a tradition of visual imagination that ran through decades of film and television. In this sense, The Simpsons may not have predicted the tablet computer so much as contributed, however slightly, to a cultural image of what people might want. A flat, easy, immediate screen for entertainment and communication. An object that fits into the particular shape of Homer's lazy, lovable relationship with technology. The image entered the culture. The culture eventually built what it had been imagining. This is speculative, but it is a different kind of speculation than the conspiratorial kind. It treats the show not as a secret record of future events, but as an active participant in the culture it was analyzing. The Simpsons did not just observe America. For a certain stretch of years, in a certain way that is hard to fully quantify, it shaped how Americans thought about themselves. And things that shape how a culture thinks about itself have a way of influencing what that culture eventually builds. The theory that catches some fans most powerfully is the one that frames the predictions not as prescience but as programming. In this reading, powerful people or institutions, corporations, governments, groups of insiders use popular entertainment to signal upcoming events to one another or to prepare the public for changes that have already been decided. The Simpsons, in this frame, becomes a kind of cultural newsletter, broadcasting in plain sight. This theory is not supportable by evidence, and it requires imagining a conspiracy of remarkable scale and coordination. But it is worth examining why the theory is appealing, because the appeal tells you something real. The appeal comes from the desire to live in a world where the patterns are intentional, where the connections mean something, where the future is legible to someone, even if that someone is not you. There is a specific anxiety in living through an era of rapid, unpredictable change. Things shift faster than anyone can track. Institutions that seemed permanent dissolve. Technologies that seemed futuristic become ordinary within a few years. In that environment, the idea that something as familiar and beloved as a cartoon was quietly tracking all of it, that the show was a kind of map, offers a particular comfort. The world makes sense. Someone knows what is happening. The comfort is understandable even if the premise is not quite right. What the predictions actually reveal is something a little more honest and a little more useful. They reveal that sustained attention to the mechanisms of a culture is a form of intelligence that has real predictive power. They reveal that satirical imagination is not just entertainment, it is a mode of thinking that can model the future more accurately than most formal forecasting. They reveal that a show built on the premise of watching American life with clear, affectionate, slightly melancholy eyes was always going to find itself occasionally staring at something that hadn't quite happened yet. The writers of The Simpsons were not seers. They were observers, and sometimes observation, carried to its logical conclusions, arrives at the same destination as the future. There is one more layer to this, and it lives in the fan theory space specifically. The coma theory, which we explored earlier, offers an interesting frame for the predictions phenomenon. If Homer is dreaming, if the show is the product of a mind under tremendous stress, reorganizing its sense of the world into coherent story, then the predictions take on a different quality. A dreaming mind does not predict the future, but it does draw on everything the dreamer has absorbed about the world. Homer Simpson, even in a hospital bed in Springfield, has spent his entire life immersed in American culture. He has watched television, absorbed advertising, overheard news programs, absorbed the ambient texture of a particular country at a particular time. If the show is his dream, then the predictions are his subconscious doing what subconscious minds do, sorting through everything it knows, running the patterns forward, arriving at images that the waking world would eventually produce. The dreaming mind as cultural processor, the unconscious as forecasting engine. It is a reading that does not demand anything conspiratorial. It only requires that Homer Simpson's mind be what the show has always suggested it is: surprisingly deep, surprisingly attentive, and quietly full of a kind of wisdom that his waking self would never claim. The predictions are real. The explanations for them are layered. The most boring explanation is correct, and the most interesting explanations are illuminating. And all of them together suggest that what The Simpsons was doing, at its best, was something a little more serious than making people laugh on Sunday evenings. It was paying attention. And in a culture that moves as fast and as chaotically as the one it was examining, paying attention is its own form of prophecy. Rest here for a moment. Let the predictions settle. The tablet in Homer's hands in 1994. The president in Lisa's throwaway line in 2000. The voting machine hiccup, the smartwatch, the horse, the robots replacing the workers. Each one a small surprise that becomes, over time, a small confirmation. The show was watching. The show was always watching, and somewhere in that sustained, affectionate, slightly exhausted attention, it saw something that the rest of us couldn't quite make out yet. More on the predictions, the deeper patterns. When fans talk about the predictions, they tend to focus on the most spectacular examples. The Trump presidency, the tablet computer, the smartwatch. These are the ones that get shared, screenshotted, circulated. They are the ones that make people stop scrolling and look twice. But there is a deeper layer of predictions that gets less attention, and this layer is in some ways more interesting. These are the structural predictions, the moments when the show did not anticipate a specific event, but rather mapped out a pattern, a tendency, a direction of travel, and then the world obligingly followed the map. The Simpsons has been doing this since its earliest seasons, and the most consistent theme running through its structural predictions is this. The relationship between entertainment and seriousness in American public life was going to blur beyond recovery, and when it did, nobody was going to sound the alarm loudly enough to matter. In the show's early seasons, there is a recurring joke about television itself. News programs that prioritize spectacle over substance. Talk shows that trade in humiliation. Advertising that has absorbed the emotional vocabulary of genuine human experience and deployed it in service of selling things that nobody needs. The show made these jokes in the early 1990s, and they were recognizable as jokes because the gap between television as spectacle and television as serious communication was still visible to most viewers. The prediction was that the gap would close. By the 2010s, and certainly by the 2020s, the gap had effectively closed. Political communication had become largely indistinguishable from entertainment in both form and content. News programs had adopted the pacing, music, and emotional register of action films. The distinction between a talk show performance and a political speech had become difficult to locate. The show had been describing this tendency since 1990, which means it had been predicting the 2020s since the Bush administration. This is the kind of prediction that does not get shared as a meme. There is no clean screenshot that demonstrates it, but it is, in many ways, more striking than the Trump joke because it describes not a single event but a systemic transformation, and it describes that transformation with a clarity that most serious commentary missed until the transformation was essentially complete. The show's predictions about corporate power follow a similar pattern. In episodes from the mid-1990s through the early 2000s, the show depicted a world in which massive corporations had effectively captured regulatory agencies, in which the government's relationship with industry had inverted so that the regulated entities had more influence over the regulators than the public did, in which environmental protections were treated by powerful interests as obstacles to be managed rather than rules to be followed. Mr. Burns is the show's primary vehicle for this, and his relationship with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, with local government, with the legal system, is consistently one in which he operates with near total impunity. The comedy requires a degree of exaggeration. Burns is too cartoonish to be a direct portrait of any real businessman. But the structural dynamic he embodies, the captured regulatory state, the insulation of wealth from consequence, the way that sufficient money makes the normal rules of accountability effectively optional, has been one of the defining political observations of the early 21st century, confirmed repeatedly by investigations into financial industry behavior, pharmaceutical pricing, environmental violations, and any number of other sectors. The show was describing that dynamic as comedy in 1993. Another structural prediction that deserves more attention involves the show's treatment of nostalgia itself. From its earliest seasons, The Simpsons was interested in the way American culture was using its own past as an emotional resource, as a source of comfort and identity, in a present that felt unsatisfying. Abe Simpson is the show's primary vehicle for this too. He is a man who lives primarily in memories of a past that was better in the remembering than it was in the living, who repeatedly discovers that the things he celebrates about the old days were not as he remembered them. The prediction embedded in this theme was that nostalgia would become not just a personal tendency, but a political force, that the organized deployment of longing for a past that never quite existed would become one of the primary tools of political mobilization. The show depicted this in miniature, as comedy, decades before it became visible as a major structural feature of democratic politics in multiple countries. These structural predictions are harder to demonstrate with screenshots and timestamps. They do not resolve into a single episode and a single date, but they are, in a sense, the real substance of what the show was doing when it appeared to be predicting the future. It was not finding specific events, it was understanding mechanisms, and mechanisms, once understood with sufficient clarity, produce predictable outputs even when the specific form those outputs will take remains unknown. This is what sustained attention looks like when it produces genuine intelligence. Not fortune-telling, not access to hidden information, just a clear and consistent analysis of how certain forces interact, applied over a long enough period, by writers who were genuinely interested in what they were watching. The most haunting of the structural predictions involves something the show noticed about the nature of collective memory and shared culture in a media-saturated society. In multiple episodes across multiple seasons, the show depicted people who were unable to distinguish between their actual experiences and the mediated representations of experience that they had consumed through television. Characters who describe their lives in the language of television narratives. Characters who respond to real events with emotional scripts borrowed from entertainment rather than developed from their own genuine responses. The prediction was that this tendency toward the colonization of genuine emotional life, by mediated representations of emotional life would intensify as media saturation increased. The show was describing something in the 1990s that has become, by the mid-2020s, one of the defining features of how large numbers of people relate to their own experience. It is not an accident that The Simpsons anticipated this. The show was, itself, a piece of media that was aware of its own mediating function. It was a television show about people whose lives were shaped by television, which meant it had a continuous built-in awareness of the mechanism it was also participating in. This recursive quality, the show as both participant in and analyst of media saturation, gave it a kind of double vision that most entertainment products do not have, and it is from that double vision that a significant part of its predictive power derived. The last prediction to discuss tonight is the one that is most personal and perhaps most quietly devastating. In the show's middle seasons, roughly the period from the early to mid-2000s, there is a recurring theme about the erosion of civic life. Not in the dramatic sense of governmental collapse, but in the quieter sense of neighborhood connection fraying, of the small social bonds that hold communities together slowly dissolving, of people in proximity becoming increasingly unable to experience genuine solidarity or mutual recognition. Springfield has always been a satirical community. Its civic institutions are corrupt or ridiculous. Its townspeople are often selfish or deluded. The democracy of Springfield is a comedy of democratic dysfunction. But in the show's best episodes, even through all of this, the people of Springfield manage moments of genuine connection. They come together. They help each other. They experience something that functions like community, even if it would not survive a political science analysis. The prediction was that these moments of genuine connection would become harder to sustain, that the forces working against civic life, the commercial forces, the media environment, the economic pressures, the political dysfunction would eventually overwhelm them, that the comedy of democratic failure would stop being comedy at some point and become something else. The show did not make this prediction in a single episode. It made it in the gradual evolution of its own tone, in the increasing darkness of its later seasons, in the way that Springfield's civic life became less and less recoverable from one episode to the next. The community became less able to gather and hold. The connections became more fragile. The satire became harder to distinguish from the thing it was satirizing. This is the prediction that nobody shares as a meme. It has no timestamp. It has no clean before and after. But if you watch the show across its full run from the warmth and specificity of the early seasons through the middle period and into what the show became later, you can feel it. The temperature changed. The world the show was describing changed, and the show, even as it continued to produce episodes, was documenting its own diminishment in a way that mirrored the diminishment of the thing it had always been about. The predictions were real. They were not magic. They were the product of sustained, clear-eyed attention to a culture that was moving in certain directions, applied by writers who were intelligent and honest enough to follow those directions to their conclusions, even when the conclusions were uncomfortable. That is a form of responsibility that not many pieces of entertainment have ever taken on. And the fact that the show's most serious predictive work is invisible because it does not resolve into clean screenshots and shareable moments is, in its own quiet way, part of the prediction. The things that matter most are the ones nobody takes a screenshot of. Section 8. Mona Simpson, the conspiracy behind Homer's broken life. There is a shape to Homer Simpson's sadness that most people recognize without quite naming it. He is loud and impulsive and often ridiculous. He eats too much and thinks too little and makes decisions that nobody watching can quite believe. He is, in the language of the show's comedic machinery, a buffoon. And yet there are moments, quiet moments, usually when the buffoonery drops away and something else appears, something tender and a little lost. Something that looks, when you catch it at the right angle, like a person who learned very early that he was not quite enough for the people around him and has spent the rest of his life eating and drinking and working at a job he hates in order to not have to think about it. The theory about Mona Simpson is about where that shape came from. Most people who watch the show know the basic facts. Homer's mother left when he was a child. She was involved with a 1960s activist group that conducted protests against the government, specifically against work being done at a military installation. During one of these actions, she released a gas that the government was developing for weapons purposes. She became a fugitive. She could not stay. She left Homer and Abe and vanished, and Homer grew up believing for years, for most of his life, that she was dead. She reappears in a 1995 episode simply titled Mother Simpson, and the episode is widely considered one of the finest the show has ever produced. It is slow and careful and genuinely moving in ways that the show rarely permitted itself. Homer finds his mother alive. He spends a brief period with her. She is warm and intelligent and visibly in love with the son she had to leave. And then government agents close in the same forces that have been tracking her for decades, and she has to run again. The episode ends with Homer sitting on the hood of his car in a darkened field, staring up at the stars, in a shot that lasts long enough to mean something. He doesn't cry. He just sits there. The theory built around Mona Simpson is not about whether she was a good or bad person. The show is fairly generous to her. She is portrayed with empathy, and her political commitments are treated as genuine rather than foolish. The theory is about what her absence did to Homer, specifically, and whether the shape of his adulthood can be understood as a direct consequence of the particular way she left. Here is the foundation. Homer was, by all available evidence, a sensitive and somewhat dreamy child. We see glimpses of this in flashback episodes. He liked music, he had ideas. He was close to his mother in a way that small children are close to the parent who represents warmth and possibility. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, is depicted throughout the show's run as emotionally withholding, dismissive, and largely absent even when physically present. Abe is not evil. He is just a man of a particular generation, shaped by a particular set of experiences, who does not have much access to the language of emotional connection. He provided. He did not nurture. Mona provided the nurturing, and then Mona left. What a child does with that departure depends enormously on how it is explained. Homer was not told the truth that his mother had gone underground, that she was a fugitive, that she was alive and thinking about him from a distance. He was told, or allowed to believe, that she was dead. And Abe, for reasons of his own that the show gestures toward without fully excavating, allowed that belief to persist. The theory holds that Homer's entire psychology, his impulsivity, his emotional volatility, his complicated relationship with achievement and ambition, his intense focus on food and comfort, his desperate need for acceptance, his sometimes baffling loyalty to people and institutions that have not earned it, is the architecture of a child who lost the person who made him feel worth something and was never given a real explanation for it. This is not on its face a wild suggestion. It is broadly consistent with what developmental psychology says about early loss. But the fan theory goes further than the psychological framework, and this is where it gets interesting. The theory argues that the government knew about Homer, the same forces that spent decades tracking Mona Simpson, the FBI agents, the surveillance apparatus, the institutional memory of an organization that does not forget its fugitives, would also have known that Mona had a son. They would have had files on Abe Simpson. They would have known where the family was. And they would have made, at some point, a decision about how to handle that information. The theory's most detailed version suggests that the reason Homer ended up at the Springfield nuclear power plant, a facility that is itself connected to government contracts, military infrastructure, and a web of regulatory relationships that the show treats as deeply corrupt, is not an accident. It is a placement. Homer was steered toward that job. By whom, and how completely deliberately? The theory doesn't fully specify, but the implication is that keeping Mona's son employed at a facility under government oversight was a form of leverage. If Mona ever resurfaced, there was something to threaten. If she tried to contact Homer, there was a way to know about it. The evidence for this reading is circumstantial but consistent. Homer's hiring at the plant is never fully explained within the show's logic. He is catastrophically unqualified. His repeated incompetence, which should have led to termination dozens of times over, somehow never does the plant continues to employ him despite safety violations, disasters, and behavior that would end any normal person's career. Mr. Burns is aware of Homer in a way that seems disproportionate for a man who employs thousands of workers and routinely forgets Homer's name. The name forgetting itself is a running joke, but the joke has a shadow. Burns occasionally reveals in small ways that he knows more about Homer than the amnesia would suggest. The fan theory's most evocative detail involves the episode Homer's Enemy, which introduced Frank Grimes, a man of genuine competence and moral seriousness, who is destroyed by the simple act of trying to make sense of Homer's life. Grimes cannot understand how Homer has what he has: a good house, a family, a job he has kept despite every imaginable disqualification. Grimes works hard and follows the rules and earns everything he gets, and he ends up bitter and exhausted. Homer blunders through and lands on his feet, over and over. The theory reads Frank Grimes as the show's own acknowledgement that Homer's continued survival in the system is not natural. It should not work, and yet it does. The theory's answer is that it works because someone, somewhere in the institutional structure that surrounds Homer's life, has a reason to keep him where he is. There is another thread. The episode Doe In the Wind, a lighter, more comedic installment, reveals that Homer's middle name is Jay, chosen in honor of a family friend named Seth and Munchie, hippies who were friends of Mona's. In this episode, Homer learned something about his mother's life before she was a fugitive. And the detail that lodges in the theory is this: the people Mona knew, the communities she moved through, were deeply connected to a period of political activism that the government was actively monitoring and sometimes disrupting. Mona was not just a person who made one bad choice. She was embedded in a network, and networks, in the institutional logic of surveillance, mean that the people connected to members of that network are also of interest. Homer, in this reading, has been a person of interest his entire adult life without knowing it. This reframes the entirety of his life in the plant. The casual incompetence, the disasters that resolve, the way the system seems to absorb him no matter what he does. He is not just a lucky fool. He is, in some sense, protected, kept in a position where he can be watched, where his mother's potential contact points can be monitored, where the leverage of his continued employment and safety can be used as a backstop against the woman who, 30 years after her departure, is still running. The emotional core of this theory does not lie in the surveillance architecture. It lies in a quieter implication. If Homer was watched and managed throughout his adult life, then the things he struggled for, the promotions he almost got and didn't, the side ventures that collapsed, the moments when he seemed about to build something different for himself and somehow never quite did take on a different quality. The theory does not go quite so far as to say that his failures were engineered, but it asks the question. It asks whether Homer's life, already shaped by the early departure of the parent who made him feel capable, was also quietly shaped by institutions that had a stake in keeping him exactly where he was. A man who is watched is not a free man, even if he doesn't know he's being watched. And a man whose deepest wound, the loss of his mother, the belief that she died and left him, turns out to be a lie, a managed story, a false bottom in his own personal history, is a man whose identity is built on ground that was prepared for him without his knowledge. The Mother Simpson episode, revisited through this lens, becomes even more painful. When Homer finds his mother and spends those few days with her, the episode is careful to show what he gets back in that brief window: a sense of being known. The experience of having someone look at him, really look at him, not at the disaster he causes or the job title he somehow holds and see value there. Mona sees Homer clearly, and she loves what she sees. And then she has to leave, again. The shot of Homer on the hood of the car, staring at the stars, after she goes. He has had the wound reopened and reclosed in the space of a single episode. He has been given the answer to the question that shaped his childhood. She didn't die. She loved me. She ran because she had to, not because of me, and then had that answer taken away again. In the context of the coma theory, this episode is almost unbearably specific. If Homer is dreaming, this is the dream confronting its own wound directly. The deep structure of the injury you were left, and the reason you were left was hidden from you, and when you found the truth, it was taken away again, rendered in one careful, beautifully constructed episode that ends without resolution. The wound is still there. The car on the dark field, the stars. Homer goes home the next morning and makes a terrible breakfast and fails at something minor, and the episode is over. But the shot stays. The theory about Mona, at its most fully developed, is a theory about institutional cruelty, about what it costs a person to be a variable in someone else's political equation. Mona paid one kind of cost. Homer paid another. And the particular texture of Homer's adulthood, the hunger, the impulsiveness, the desperate comic need to be loved, the way he flings himself at life as though something might finally stick, is the ledger of that cost, accumulated over decades, expressed in a voice that makes you laugh so you don't notice it making you sad. The show knew this. The writers, at their best, knew exactly what they were doing when they built Homer Simpson. They built a man whose comedy was inseparable from his damage. And somewhere in the design of that damage was a mother who left, a father who stayed but wasn't quite present, and an adulthood spent at a job in a plant that hummed with radiation and did not make very much sense when you looked at it too carefully. The theory ties it together into something coherent, something that says, the shape of Homer's sadness did not come from nowhere, it was built. It was constructed, partly by love and loss, partly by institutional machinery, partly by the particular cruelty of a government that files people away as variables without noticing that those variables have children who will spend their whole lives carrying the weight of the decision. Homer does not know any of this. He sits on the hood of the car and stares at the stars, and the stars don't tell him anything. They never do. The wound that Homer carried Mona's full impact. The theory about Mona Simpson rewards deeper examination, and the place to go deeper is in the small details that the show scattered across its run, details that, taken individually, are easy to miss, but taken together form a portrait of a man whose foundational emotional experience is the experience of being left without explanation. There is an episode in Season 7 called Mother Simpson, the episode in which Homer finds his mother alive, and it contains a detail that the theory builds a significant part of its structure on. When Homer encounters his mother for the first time, there is a moment before the recognition. He sees a woman at a gravestone. He does not immediately know who she is. And in that moment before knowing, the shot of Homer's face shows something that is not quite any recognizable emotion. It is the face of someone whose body has recognized something before the mind has caught up. A cellular-level response. The kind of thing that happens when you encounter someone whose absence has been a wound for so long that the wound has become structural. The theory reads this moment as the show's most honest statement about what Mona's absence did to Homer. It did not just take away a parent. It took away the part of Homer's self that was organized around that parent, the part that knew itself as loved, as valued, as the kind of person worth staying for. When a child loses a parent and is told the parent died, there is grief, but the grief is clean in a certain way. The parent did not choose to leave. The parent could not help it. The child is not the reason. When a child grows up believing a parent died, but the parent is actually alive and has been alive, has chosen to remain absent, has allowed the lie of death to persist, the grief is not clean. Even if the child later learns the truth, even if the truth is sympathetic, there is a period, perhaps a lifelong period, in which the body carries the question that the mind cannot quite articulate. Was I not enough to stay for? Homer carries this question through the entire run of the show. It is never stated directly, but it is there in the shape of his neediness, his hunger, his desperate desire to be loved by people who will sometimes find him very difficult to love. It is there in his relationship with his own children, the ferocity of it, the way he tries to give them the constant, present love that he himself did not receive, tries and fails and tries again with a persistence that the comedy often plays as repetition, but that the theory reads as compulsion. He is trying to close a wound by not letting his children inherit it. The government surveillance thread of the theory, when you add this emotional layer to it, becomes a different kind of horror. If Homer was, in fact, kept in the plant by institutional forces that had an interest in his location and his stability, then the grinding routine of his adult life, the alarm clock, the car, the plant, the Homer scream, the bar, the home, repeat was not just the unchosen life of a man with modest ambitions. It was the managed life of a man who had been positioned as a surveillance asset without his knowledge or consent. And the cruelest implication of this is that the stability of his family, the very thing he values most, the very thing the dream is built to protect, may have been, in part, an artifact of that management. He stayed at the job. He stayed in the house. He stayed in Springfield, not because he chose it, but because the choosing had been done for him in ways he could not see. The episode Homer's Enemy is, as mentioned earlier, the show's most explicit engagement with the question of why Homer's life works when it shouldn't. Frank Grimes is destroyed by this question, and the theory reads Grimes's destruction not as a comedy about the unfairness of life, but as the show's acknowledgement that the question itself is dangerous. To really look at why Homer has what Homer has is to pull on a thread that unravels something. Grimes pulls the thread and is undone. The show kills him because allowing him to continue existing, to continue asking the question, would require the show to answer it, and the answer is not funny. There is one more specific episode that the Mona theory reaches into, and it is not one that most people associate with this storyline. The episode is Marge Be Not Proud, from Season 7, in which Bart shoplifts a video game and is caught and humiliated, and the arc of the episode turns on Marge's hurt and withdrawal, the experience of a parent pulling back emotional warmth in response to a child's failure. The episode is ostensibly about Bart, but the emotional register it establishes is Homer's emotional register. The experience of the parent withdrawing, of the warmth becoming conditional, of the love seeming to hinge on behavior is exactly the unresolved experience Homer carries from his own childhood. And the episode's resolution, in which Marge returns her warmth unconditionally, and Bart is received back into full love despite his mistake, is the resolution that Homer never got. The theory holds that the show is, in episodes like this, working out Homer's damage through his children. He experienced conditional love, or the collapse of love, early in his life. And so the show builds episodes repeatedly, across seasons in which the stakes are whether a child will still be loved after they have failed. And in almost every case, the answer is yes. The love survives the failure. The warmth returns. Homer is healing, in the dream, by watching his children receive what he did not. This is why the coma theory and the Mona theory are, in the end, the same theory. They are both about what Homer is trying to work through in the space of the dream, in the space of 35 years of episodes, in the space of a life that keeps resetting to the same starting point. Because the work is not done. He is trying to become the parent he did not have. He is trying to build the family that would have made his childhood survivable. He is trying, in the only space available to him, to close the wound that opened on the day his mother did not come home. The dream continues because the wound is not yet closed. But there are moments: the arm around Bart's shoulder, the hand in Marge's, the hour spent reading to Maggie in the dark when something shifts. When Homer, for a moment, is exactly the father he is trying to be. When the wound is not healed, but it is, for a moment, quiet. These are the moments the show is made of. The comedy is the container. Inside the container is this. Section 9. Where is Springfield, the town that cannot be located? If you have spent any time in the Simpsons fan community, you have encountered the question, where is Springfield? It seems like it should have a simple answer. The show is set in a specific town. That town has features a nuclear power plant, a coastline, a desert, a mountain range nearby, proximity to several other cities. It has a climate that shifts dramatically depending on the episode. It has a history that the show returns to with varying degrees of consistency. It should be possible, given all of this, to triangulate a location. The question has been asked so often, with such earnestness and such ingenuity, that it has generated something like a small academic industry. People have mapped the town's geography against known American topography. They have cross-referenced the surrounding states mentioned in different episodes. They have noted the latitude implied by the sun's angle in establishing shots, the species of trees visible in background art, the particular temperature ranges that the show's weather patterns suggest. They have arrived at candidates: Oregon, Kentucky, Illinois, California, Nevada, somewhere in New England, somewhere in the Midwest, somewhere that doesn't quite exist. Every candidate works, and none of them works completely. This is not an accident. Matt Groening, the show's creator, was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. Springfield is the name of a city in Oregon. It is the city directly adjacent to Eugene, where Groening spent much of his childhood. This is the real origin of the name. When the show was first developed, Springfield was meant to carry the resonance of that specific regional geography, that specific kind of mid-sized American city that is large enough to have everything, and small enough that everyone's life is vaguely connected to everyone else's. But Groening has also, in interviews over the decades, been deliberately evasive about confirming this. He once said famously that Springfield was in a state that bordered Ohio, Kentucky, Maine, and Tennessee, which is a geographic impossibility, a statement that describes no actual American state. He later seemed to reveal in a 2012 Smithsonian Magazine interview that Springfield was meant to be Springfield, Oregon, and then almost immediately walked back the specificity, saying it was more of a composite, a nowhere place that could be anywhere. The evasion is intentional, and the intention is meaningful. Springfield is designed to be unlocatable. It is designed to be, in a precise and structural way, somewhere and nowhere simultaneously. This is not a failure of the show's world building. It is the whole point. The fan theory built around this fact comes in several versions, but the most compelling one argues that Springfield's impossible geography is a reflection of something true about the kind of place it is meant to represent. Springfield is not a specific location. It is an archetype. It is the idea of a certain kind of American town. The town where the promise of the post-war settlement persists past the point where it has any material basis, where people go to work at jobs they don't quite believe in anymore, where the civic institutions function just well enough to keep everyone from noticing that they have stopped doing what civic institutions are supposed to do. The impossibility of the location is the show's way of saying, this town is everywhere. You know this town. You grew up near this town, or in it, or you have spent your life in a version of it without ever quite calling it by name. The geography is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a rhetorical gesture. But the theory goes further. One version of the theory collects the specific geographic references from across the show's run and argues that they are not contradictions, but evidence of something else entirely. Springfield has a harbor. It has a desert. It has snowy mountains within driving distance. It has flatlands. It has a coastline and also an interior. It experiences all 4 seasons with roughly equal intensity. It is near several large cities, but is itself mid-sized. It has a tire fire that has been burning for years. It has a nuclear plant, and a lemon tree, and a professional football team, and a monorail that briefly existed, and a dam, and a butte, and a lighthouse. The list of features is impossible for any single American city. The list is internally contradictory. And the theory's answer is that this is because Springfield is composite not just as a piece of vague symbolic geography, but as a deliberate construction assembled from multiple real American places, none of which entirely dominates. The Portland geography shows in the town's physical shape, its Pacific Northwest sensibility, its slightly gray and melancholy ambience. The Midwestern geography shows in its political culture, its relationship to the auto industry and manufacturing, its particular kind of Main Street commercial decline. The Southern geography shows in specific episodes the ones where Springfield tilts toward heat and humidity and a certain kind of insular community logic. The Southwestern geography shows in the episodes where the desert is immediately outside the town, where the landscape turns ochre and spare. Springfield is, in this reading, a city assembled from the meaningful features of the whole country. A city built to contain everything America has ever told itself about the kind of place ordinary people live. And because that story is itself contradictory because America has never been fully consistent about what a good ordinary life looks like, or where it takes place, Springfield is contradictory too. There is another thread that the theory picks up, and it is more specific. In the episode Behind the Laughter, which is shot in the style of a VH1 documentary and treats the Simpsons as a real family who became famous, the narrator describes them as coming from a northern Kentucky community. This is presented as a joke. The whole episode is a meta-joke about the nature of the show's reality, but some fans have taken it seriously as a buried confession. Northern Kentucky is, in terms of American cultural geography, a specific kind of place. It is near Cincinnati, it is industrial, it has the particular weight of a region that was prosperous in a certain era, and has since negotiated with the decline of that prosperity in complicated ways. It fits Springfield's economic mood more precisely than almost any other candidate. But the coma theory complicates even this. If Springfield is Homer's dream, if the geography of the town is the product of a mind under stress, building a world from memory and longing, then the impossibility of the location makes a different kind of sense. A dream does not have a consistent geography. A dream is assembled from fragments of everything the dreamer knows, layered on top of each other, without regard for the physical constraints that govern waking space. In a dream, you can be near the ocean and the mountains at the same time. In a dream, it can snow in one episode and bake in the next, without any of the residents finding this strange. Homer Simpson grew up somewhere. He has absorbed over his entire life the textures of American place, the industrial regions and the coastal regions, and the Midwestern flatlands and the southern heat and the Northwestern gray. And his dreaming mind, building a town in which his whole life makes sense, has drawn on all of it. The harbor is there because harbors mean childhood and adventure and the scale of the world being larger than expected. The desert is there because deserts mean solitude and the particular loneliness of an interior life that nobody quite acknowledges. The mountains are there because mountains mean the things that are large and distant and cannot be reached no matter how long you walk toward them. Springfield's impossible geography is, in this reading, a map of Homer's interior life. Every feature of the town corresponds to something he carries. The nuclear plant is the center, the place he goes every day, the source of the ambient radiation, the thing that defines his life and that he had no real choice about. The surrounding geography arranges itself around that center according to emotional logic, not physical logic, and the result is a town that cannot be located on any map, because it does not exist on the map of the physical world. It exists on the map of a person. This is why the question of where Springfield is will never have a satisfying final answer. The show will not give one because the show cannot give one without destroying what Springfield is. The moment Springfield is planted firmly in Oregon or Kentucky or Illinois, it stops being everywhere. It stops being the town you grew up near. It stops being the ambient backdrop of the ordinary American life, positioned just close enough to recognition to feel real, and just far enough from specificity to allow the imagination to settle into it. The question of where Springfield is the wrong question. The right question is why Springfield feels like somewhere you have been. And the answer to that question is not geographical. It is something closer to cultural recognition, the experience of seeing a place that was assembled specifically to match the texture of the America that most people actually live in, not the America of postcards or political speeches or idealized memory, but the one with the tire fire burning at the edge of town and the nuclear plant on the hill, and the mayor who is corrupt in a mild and almost comfortable way, and the neighbors who are kind and strange and who you have known for 30 years without ever quite knowing. That is the America the Simpsons built. And Springfield is where it lives. The impossibility is the point. The town that cannot be found on a map is the town that everyone already lives in. Somewhere in the landscape of your own life, in the town you grew up in, or the town you left, or the town you imagine, when someone says the word home, there is something that looks like Springfield. The plant on the hill, the diner with the bad coffee, the neighbors with the inexplicable life choices. The sense that the whole thing is slightly askew from what was promised, slightly askew from what it should be, but also, in the way that lived-in things are, irreplaceable. Homer lives there. He has always lived there. And when you settle into the dream of the show, when you let the geography go, when you stop trying to locate it and just let it be, it turns out Springfield has been exactly where you are all along. Springfield as emotional geography. The impossibility of Springfield's location carries more information than the fan debates about it typically acknowledge. When you look at what Springfield contains, all of the features that make it physically impossible, all of the contradictory geographies layered on top of each other, you begin to see a pattern. The features of Springfield are not random. They are emotionally significant. The ocean is there because water, at its edges, means the limit of the known world. When Homer or another character stands at the coast in Springfield, they are standing at the edge of something. The ocean in these scenes is not a piece of geography. It is a psychological threshold, the place where the familiar ends and the uncertain begins. The show reaches for it when it needs to convey a sense of scale, of the world being larger than Springfield, of life being larger than the life available in the town. The mountains are there for a different reason. Mountains in Springfield are almost always associated with isolation. When a character goes to the mountains, they are going somewhere harder to reach, somewhere outside the social web of the town, somewhere where they can think or be tested or confront something they have been avoiding. The mountains are not a vacation destination. They are a proving ground. And proving grounds have always been mountains, in the deepest grammar of human storytelling, because mountains require effort, and the effort reveals what is inside you. The desert is the loneliest geography Springfield has. When the show places characters in the desert, the Nevada-like flat expanse that appears in certain episodes, the emotional register is desolation, separation from connection, the particular silence of a landscape that does not care whether you are there. The desert episodes in The Simpsons are almost always episodes about someone's isolation becoming externally visible, about an interior state finding its perfect expression in a landscape that offers nothing back. The fact that Springfield has all of these geographies, ocean and mountain and desert and flatland and ice, means that it has all of these emotional registers available. The town is not a specific place. It is a complete emotional palette. Any state of feeling that a character might need to externalize has a corresponding landscape just outside Springfield's edges, accessible whenever the story requires it. This is unusual in television. Most shows build a world with a consistent geography that the stories have to work within. The Simpsons built a world with a consistent emotional geography that the physical geography serves. The physical world of Springfield is subordinate to its emotional logic, which is why it cannot be physically located. It is not organized according to physical logic. The theory that Springfield is Homer's dream space makes this completely coherent. In a dream, the landscape does not have a fixed structure. It reshapes itself according to what the dream needs. The dreamer who needs to confront isolation finds the desert. The dreamer who needs to face the edge of the known finds the ocean. The dreamer who needs to be tested finds the mountain. And the town at the center, the home, the family, the couch remains constant. The anchor holds. Everything else reconfigures around it. This is exactly what Springfield does. The couch is always there. The family always lands on it. Everything else in the town, every piece of geography, every institutional building, every incidental feature is provisional, reconfigured from episode to episode according to emotional need. Only the home is fixed. In the grammar of dream interpretation, the fixed element of a recurring dream is the element that carries the most psychological weight. What cannot move is what matters most. And in Homer's dream, what cannot move is the yellow house on Evergreen Terrace, the couch in the living room, the family landing on it together at the end of every episode. He cannot move them because they are the reason the dream exists. The geography of Springfield is the geography of a man who built an entire world to keep that one fixed point safe. And everything else, the desert, the ocean, the mountains, the impossibility, the tire fire, the nuclear cooling towers is arranged around the perimeter, keeping the weather out. Section 10. The Floating Timeline. Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and the Hidden Architecture of Springfield's Time. We have spent a long time in Springfield tonight. We have followed Homer through the nuclear plant and the hospital room and the dream that may or may not have replaced his waking life. We have followed Mr. Burns through a century he should not have survived. We have found Maggie in corners of episodes where nobody expected her to be paying attention. We have stood in the town square of a city that cannot be located on any map and felt, somehow, that we knew exactly where we were. Before we close, there are 3 final threads to pull. 3 figures, 3 theories, 1 final synthesis. And then the lights go down. The first thread is time itself. The Simpsons does not age. This is one of the show's most discussed structural features, and it is usually explained as simple creative pragmatism. Aging the characters would eventually require ending the show, so the characters do not age. The family stays at roughly the same ages. Bart and Lisa and Maggie do not grow up. Homer and Marge do not grow old. Time passes in the world around the show, but not inside it. This is called the floating timeline, and in practice it means that the show exists in a perpetual approximate present. The episodes reference current events, current technology, current cultural figures, but they do so from a position outside of normal time. A 2005 episode and a 2022 episode both feel like they are happening now, even though they cannot both be happening in the same now. The fan theory built around this feature argues that the floating timeline is not a production convenience. It is the show's most literal statement of what it is and what it is doing. Time in Springfield does not pass, because Springfield is a dream space, and dreams do not have timelines. A dream can compress a decade into a single night, can revisit the same moment from different angles without those revisits having any relationship to clock time, can contain memories and anticipations and present experiences, all layered on top of each other without any of the usual markers that tell the dreaming mind what comes first. If Homer is dreaming, he is not dreaming in sequence. He is dreaming in accumulation. The stories pile up on each other. Bart does not grow up because in the dream, Bart is always Bart the 10-year-old son who is trouble and wonder and the specific kind of joyful chaos that a man lying very still in a hospital room might need his son to forever be. Lisa is always 8 because Lisa at 8 is still reachable, still someone whose life Homer can influence, still someone who looks up to him even when she is disappointed. still someone who has not yet moved past him into a future he cannot follow. To age the children would be to let them go, and the dream does not let them go. The floating timeline is not a production choice. It is grief management. It is the mechanism by which Homer's dreaming mind keeps his family in a state of permanent reachability. They are always there. They always need him. The morning after the dream, the morning he might wake up, is deferred indefinitely by the logic of the timeline. But there is a complication. The episodes do, in fact, sometimes contradict each other. Homer's history changes. Marge and Homer's courtship is retold in different ways in different episodes, with different details that don't fully align. The town's history shifts. Events that seem to have established facts get quietly revised. The floating timeline is not perfectly consistent. It has wrinkles, gaps, places where the seams show. The theory accounts for this too. Dreams are not internally consistent. They revise their own history. A dream can tell you a story about your own life and then, in the next dream, tell you a slightly different version of the same story, and neither version feels wrong from the inside. The inconsistencies in Springfield's history are the inconsistencies of the dreaming mind processing its own memories, not corrupted data, but the natural variation of a consciousness that is doing its best to hold a life together in a space where time does not flow in a straight line. The second thread is Hans Moleman. Hans Moleman is a recurring character in The Simpsons who appears to die in almost every episode that features him. He is hit by cars, falls into pits, is crushed by falling objects, is burned, drowned, buried alive, and subjected to an improbable variety of other fatal mishaps. And yet he always returns. He is always there in the next episode, moling quietly through Springfield. 31 years old according to his license, despite appearing to be approximately 100, suffering his endless series of calamities with the particular resignation of someone who has accepted that this is simply what happens to him. The fan theory about Hans Moleman is pleasingly dark and surprisingly coherent. It holds that Hans Moleman is dead. He died, at some point early in the show's run, in one of the mishaps that the comedy uses as a punchline. And what we see every time he appears is not Hans Moleman continuing to live, it is Hans Moleman's ghost, continuing to occupy the spaces he occupied in life, subject to the same indignities, incapable of leaving. Springfield, in this reading, retains its dead. The nuclear radiation, the peculiar rules of the dream space, the specific metaphysics of a town that exists outside normal time, all of these mean that Hans Moleman cannot pass on. He is trapped in the loop. This theory is obviously comic in origin, but it has a layer. The deeper version of the Hans Moleman theory connects to a broader reading of Springfield as a place that holds people. Not just the dead, but the living who should perhaps have left. The Simpsons has, across its run, gestured at the idea that Springfield is not a place people choose so much as a place they end up and then cannot quite escape. Homer has left multiple times. He always comes back. Characters who seem to depart tend to reappear. The town exerts a gravity. In the coma theory, this gravity is the dreaming mind's resistance to loss. Homer cannot let anyone leave because letting them leave means accepting that they are gone. Hans Moleman, in this reading, is the show's comic expression of that resistance taken to its extreme. A character who keeps dying and cannot leave, whose only function is to be killed and return, in an infinite loop that is both a joke and a quietly specific image of what it looks like when a dreaming mind refuses to release anyone from its space. Every death in Springfield is temporary. That is the rule. And Hans Moleman is the rule personified. The third thread is Ned Flanders. Ned Flanders is Homer's neighbor. He is cheerful and kind and deeply religious and almost preternaturally capable. His lawn is better than Homer's lawn. His house is nicer. His children are well-behaved. His body, famously, is improbably athletic beneath the cable-knit sweater. He loved his wife Maude with a visible and uncomplicated tenderness that the show occasionally used as a quiet rebuke to Homer's more chaotic domestic arrangements. He is, in almost every measurable way, the better version of what Homer could have been. He is also, and this is the theory, Homer's conscience. The fan theory about Ned Flanders holds that he functions in the show's psychological architecture as the internalized standard by which Homer measures himself and finds himself wanting. Every time Homer looks at Ned and feels the particular irritation that the show codes as irrational resentment, What he is actually experiencing is the discomfort of comparison. Not jealousy in the conventional sense, but the specific distress of someone who knows, at some level, that the life next door represents a road not taken. This theory is supported by the unusual depth of feeling that exists in Homer's relationship with Ned, both negative and positive. Homer despises Ned in a way that seems disproportionate, and yet he also, in moments that the show treats with care, genuinely cares about Ned. When Maud Flanders died, killed by a t-shirt cannon at a racing event, in a genuinely strange and abrupt narrative choice, Homer's reaction was not comedic. He tried to help. He tried, in his blundering and imperfect way, to be present for a person he professed not to like. The theory's most emotionally specific version comes from a reading of the episode Hurricane Neddy, in which Ned Flanders, after his house is destroyed by a hurricane and rebuilt badly by the townspeople who meant well, snaps. He loses his composure completely, spectacularly, and delivers a furious speech to everyone in Springfield, cataloging their failures. And then he checks himself into a mental institution. The episode reveals Ned's backstory. He was a deeply troubled child, raised by beatnik parents who refused to discipline him, who ended up so full of unaddressed anger that his therapist had to essentially beat the anger out of him with a paddle, a ludicrous piece of therapy that the show plays as absurdist comedy, but which, in the context of the episode's emotional content, represents a real observation about what happens when emotion is suppressed rather than integrated. Ned Flanders has been sitting on a lifetime of rage. His cheerfulness is not natural ease. It is the result of decades of suppression, of a specific and traumatic therapeutic intervention, of a conscious choice, or perhaps a compelled choice, to present a face of perfect Christian patience to a world that he is, at some level, furious at. Homer and Ned in this reading are the show's paired portraits of two responses to male emotional unavailability in American culture. Homer externalizes everything: his anger, his hunger, his love, his grief, come out immediately, messily, comedically. Ned internalizes everything: his pain goes underground, becomes the cable-knit sweater, becomes the perfect lawn, becomes the relentless cheerfulness that is indistinguishable from its opposite if you press it hard enough. The theory's final move is to connect this to the coma framework. If Springfield is Homer's dream, then Ned Flanders is a projection. He is the version of himself that Homer creates as a foil, the man who did everything right, who earned the beautiful family and the tended lawn and the easy relationship with God, and who is still somehow in pain. The dream creates Ned to show Homer something, that the road he didn't take was not, in the end, a guaranteed paradise. That Ned's perfect surface conceals the same suppressed volcano of feeling that Homer expresses openly. The dream is generous in this reading. It shows Homer that the alternatives to his own messy life were not uncomplicated. It gives him a neighbor who represents everything he is not, and then shows him that neighbor breaking down, needing help, carrying his own impossible weight. The dream is telling him, you are not the only one who is struggling. The man with the better lawn is struggling too. The man with the cleaner answers is also drowning. It is the kindest thing a dream could tell its dreamer, and now the synthesis. We have spent tonight in a town that doesn't exist on any map, following a family that may be dreaming, watching a plutocrat who has cheated mortality for a century, observing a silent infant who understands everything, tracking the predictions of a show that seemed to be paying attention to something the rest of the world hadn't noticed yet. We have sat with Homer's grief over his mother, and with the impossible geography of the town he calls home, and with the way time in Springfield refuses to move in the direction that time normally moves. All of these theories share a structure. Each one is a way of saying that The Simpsons is more than what it appears to be on the surface. That beneath the comedy, the slapstick, the yellow skin, the rotating guest stars, the annual treehouse of horror, there is something more serious being worked out. A genuine examination of what American life does to the people who live it. A genuine portrait of a man who is trying, imperfectly and often comically, to be good enough for the people he loves. A genuine reckoning with what it costs to keep going, day after day, in a town that hums with low-grade radiation and refuses to let time pass. The theories proliferate because the show invites them. It is constructed, at its best, with a density and a care that makes it legible at multiple levels simultaneously. You can watch it for the jokes. You can watch it for the warmth. And if you are patient and curious and willing to sit in the dark with it for a while, you can watch it for the other thing, the thing underneath, the shape of the sadness, the love letter to a country and a family that is also, somehow, a quiet record of everything that goes wrong. Homer Simpson is not just a buffoon. He is the dreaming center of a world built to keep his family close, built to give him the ordinary life he deserves and has never quite managed to reach. He stumbles through it every episode through the plant and the quickie mart and the living room and the driveway, and the town holds him and the family holds him and the dream continues. There are worse things to fall asleep to. There is something in the rhythm of Springfield, the familiar music, the establishing shot of the nuclear plant with the cooling towers, the school bus and the bike and the shopping cart, the couch that is always there when they come running, the family landing on it in a heap, the screen going dark that carries its own particular form of comfort. Not the comfort of things being fine, the comfort of things continuing. Of the sun rising over Springfield again, of Homer leaving for work again, of the dream cycling through its familiar shapes again. Somewhere in a hospital bed, or somewhere in a yellow house on Evergreen Terrace, Homer Simpson is still there. Still reaching for the donut. Still turning to Marge in the night. Still watching his children with that expression the show occasionally allows him to have, the one that says, without words, that he knows how lucky he is, knows it better than he can ever say, knows it in a way that his waking self would never be eloquent enough to express. The dream carries it. The dream says it for him. Bart, don't make fun of Grandpa. Lisa, I apologize. Maggie, I see you. Marge, I don't deserve you, but I am so glad you're here. The couch waits. The credits roll. Springfield keeps its watch through the night. The nuclear plant cooling towers steaming gently in the dark. The tire fire burning at the edge of town. The stars above the field where Homer once sat and looked up and didn't cry, and the dream going on and on and on. Good night, Springfield. Sleep well. Hans Moleman and the town that keeps its dead. Hans Moleman deserves more time than most analyses give him. He is small and nearly blind, with enormous glasses that seem to have been designed for someone with a different kind of face entirely. He walks with a hunch. He speaks in a voice so quiet and so tired that it sounds like a man who learned long ago that being heard was not something the universe had reserved for him. He first appeared in the show's second season, identified as the driver licensing administrator, and the show spent approximately no time establishing him before it began killing him. He has been hit by a car no fewer than 11 times across the show's run. He has been set on fire. He has been crushed under a boulder, buried alive in a pet cemetery, struck by lightning, catapulted from a medieval trebuchet that appeared in a single episode and was never explained, swallowed by a sinkhole that opened under his feet, and in one of the show's most aggressively casual deaths, simply trampled by an unspecified crowd during a street festival. In each case, the death is played as a throwaway. The show does not stop. Nobody mourns. Hans Moleman does not appear to mourn himself. He simply turns up in the next episode, ready for whatever comes next. The fan theory about Hans Moleman operates on a fairly simple initial premise. He cannot actually die. Something in his biology, or possibly in the metaphysics of Springfield itself, prevents him from staying dead. He is killed. He returns. He is killed again. He returns again. This cycle has been running, without interruption, for over 30 years. But the more interesting version of the theory asks not why he cannot die, but what this means for Springfield as a place. In most fictional worlds, death is significant. A character dies and the world registers it. Other characters respond. The death has weight. It means something about the fragility of life in that world, about the stakes of the story, about the vulnerability of the people we care about. In Springfield, death is administrative. Hans Moleman dies and the scene continues. The other characters present may glance in his direction, may offer a brief observation, and then the story moves on. Death in Springfield is a minor inconvenience for the person experiencing it, not an event of significance for the community around them. This is consistent with everything else the theories have told us about Springfield. A town that collectively decides to forget things that votes, as we saw in The Principal and The Pauper, to officially unsee the inconvenient, would naturally extend that capacity to death itself. If Springfield can decide that an imposter is the real person, if it can seal the records and banish the truth on a train, then Springfield can certainly decide that a death it found inconvenient did not, for practical purposes, occur. Hans Moleman keeps coming back because Springfield keeps deciding he is not dead. There is a darker implication nested inside this reading. If death in Springfield is reversible through collective denial, if the town's social contract includes an agreement not to acknowledge certain deaths as permanent, then the question becomes, whose deaths does Springfield acknowledge? And whose does it reverse? The show gives us no evidence that regular characters die permanently through ordinary causes. Homer has survived incidents that would kill the average person many times over. Burns has survived being shot, among other things. The town forgives injury the way it forgives everything else, by simply choosing not to record it as permanent. Hans Moleman is the edge case. He is the background character whose survival is so consistent and so conspicuous that the show uses him as a running joke specifically because it knows the audience will notice. He is the show's way of making the implicit explicit. Springfield is not a town where death means what death usually means. This has one interpretation under the coma theory that carries particular weight. In Homer's dream, nobody is allowed to die permanently because permanent death would mean loss, and Homer's dreaming mind cannot afford loss. It has already lost too much. It cannot lose anyone else. The dream preserves everyone. Even Hans Moleman, who appears in the background of hundreds of scenes and would be barely noticed if he left. The dreaming mind does not distinguish between the important and the incidental when it comes to preservation. It keeps everyone in place, everyone alive, everyone available, because to let even one person slip away would be to practice for a loss that the dream is specifically built to prevent. Hans Moleman is, in this reading, not a joke. He is the dream's anxiety made visible. The obsessive repetition of his deaths and returns is the dream testing itself. Can it hold? Can it bring him back? Yes. Good. Everyone is still here. The loop is intact. Nobody has to go yet. There are other recurring deaths in Springfield worth examining, though none as systematic as Hans Moleman's. Mayor Quimby has survived multiple assassination attempts that should have been fatal, usually by diving behind cover at the last possible moment. Principal Skinner, or Armin Tamzarian, depending on which version of the show's reality you are in, has been buried alive and survived. Dr. Nick, the show's disreputable physician, was impaled by a glass shard in the Simpsons movie and cheerfully survived with minimal medical intervention. Each of these instances carries the same structural logic. Springfield's residents are difficult to kill because Springfield's reality is maintained by a force radiation, dream logic, collective denial, or all three that has suspended the normal operation of mortality. The town is not a place where characters go to die. It is a place where characters go to persist indefinitely. The body count that the show has quietly accumulated is, if you list it, genuinely startling. Springfield has experienced factory explosions, nuclear near misses, floods, fires, a catastrophic meteor strike in at least one episode, a visit from giant mechanical ants, a runaway monorail, and the previously mentioned dome imposed by the federal government on the grounds that the town is too toxic to be safely connected to the rest of the country. In any of these events, in any realistic fictional world, dozens, if not hundreds of characters would have died, permanently, with consequences. In Springfield, the consequences are episodic at most. By the next week, the town is restored, the characters are present, and whatever happened has been absorbed into the general background hum of Springfield weirdness without leaving a visible mark. The show knows this is unusual. The show has always known. The Principal and the Pauper was, among other things, the show making its own mechanism explicit, showing you what happens when a truth is inconvenient and a community has the social infrastructure to simply make it go away. The same mechanism that erased Armin Tamzarian's identity also erases every other uncomfortable truth that Springfield would rather not carry, including deaths, including disasters, including the slow accumulation of evidence that something is deeply wrong with the place and the people in it. Hans Moleman keeps walking through the background of Springfield. He falls into the occasional sinkhole. He gets back up. He is 31 years old and looks like he has lived through 3 or 4 decades of serious geological activity. He is the town's mascot, if Springfield had a mascot. The small, nearly invisible figure who keeps appearing no matter what happens, who cannot be dislodged from the world no matter how many times the world tries. He is, if you think about it, the most Springfield character in Springfield. Ned Flanders, the full portrait. The theory about Ned Flanders has been growing in the fan community for years, and its most fully developed versions reach further than the comedy of his misfortune to something that is genuinely disturbing about what the show has built in his character. Here is the surface portrait first, because it is worth taking seriously before we peel it back. Ned Flanders is, by the show's own consistent depiction, a man who has chosen goodness consciously and repeatedly over the course of his entire adult life. He goes to church, he reads the Bible, he gives to charity, he maintains his property. He is kind to his neighbors, including and especially the neighbor who causes him more grief than any reasonable person would tolerate. He raised his sons to be polite and considerate. He was a devoted husband to Maud for the duration of their marriage. After Maud's death, he navigated grief with the same patient faith he brings to everything else, eventually finding a new partnership with Edna Krabappel that the show treated with real tenderness. He is, in the taxonomy of American masculinity, as the show depicts it, the model that the culture nominally endorses and actually punishes. The responsible, emotionally present, faith-guided, community-oriented man who does not succeed at the metrics the culture actually rewards: visibility, irreverence, getting away with things, commanding the room, and who finds, repeatedly, that goodness is not a protection against suffering. The show demonstrates this in 100 small ways. Homer's recklessness costs Ned real things: money, time, his wife's life. The community that Ned has invested in through years of quiet service fails him comprehensively when he needs it. The badly built hurricane house is the most explicit version of this, but it is a pattern, not an isolated incident. Even God, as the theory notes, appears to conduct a more active and conversational relationship with Homer, a man who does not pray, does not attend church, and does not appear to have organized his life around any recognizable spiritual framework than with Ned, who has built his entire life around his faith and receives in return the silence that the faithful are told to interpret as a test. The Hurricane Nettie episode forces all of this to the surface. Ned snaps. He says what he has been holding back, and what he says in the moment before he is institutionalized is that Springfield has failed him, that the people around him have been taking his patience and his goodness as resources to be consumed without reciprocation, and that the consumption has gone on for so long that the resource is exhausted. The show treats his breakdown with unusual seriousness for its own comedy. It lets Ned's anger be real. It does not undercut it with a joke. And when the episode arrives at the mental institution and the backstory is revealed, the beatnik parents, the untreated childhood rage, the therapeutic sessions that suppressed the anger through methods that would not be considered ethical today, the show is being as honest as it ever gets about what it has done to Ned Flanders. It has built a character whose apparent virtue is inseparable from his damage. Ned is not good because goodness came naturally to him. He is good because the alternatives were treated, very forcibly, out of him. His patience is not transcendence, it is suppression. His faith is not a freely chosen spiritual orientation. It is a coping mechanism that gives him a framework for absorbing suffering without expressing the rage that absorption generates. The theory extends this reading to Ned's relationship with Homer, which is the relationship that the show most often uses to explore Ned's character. In the theory's most provocative version, Ned's tolerance of Homer is not Christian charity. It is projection. Homer does the things that Ned cannot do. He expresses anger, he indulges impulse, he makes enormous messes and then relies on the warmth of the people around him to clean them up. He takes up space, he is loud and visible and unapologetically present in a way that the suppression has made unavailable to Ned. And Ned, watching Homer every day, watching the man who cannot contain himself and who is, somehow, surrounded by love anyway, experiences something that his therapeutic conditioning does not have a name for. He watches Homer get away with it, with being exactly the kind of person Ned was beaten out of being. And the watching is, in its own way, a form of punishment that Springfield has been administering to him every single day for 35 years. The theory about Ned connects to the larger theology of the show in a way that is worth sitting with. The Simpsons is, among many other things, a show that takes religion seriously enough to make it a recurring subject, not as easy mockery, but as a genuine engagement with the question of what faith means in a world that doesn't consistently reward it. Homer's encounter with God in Homer the Heretic is played for comedy but written with real theological weight. God appears. God speaks. God is depicted as genuinely interested in Homer, as having a personal relationship with him, as treating Homer's idiosyncrasy as something endearing rather than as something to be corrected. Ned has never had this experience. Ned has prayed every day of his life, has organized his entire existence around the attempt to be worthy of divine attention, and God has never once shown up in his story the way God showed up in Homer's. The show does not explain this. It does not offer a theological justification. It simply depicts it. Homer, the man who lives by appetite and accident, has a direct line to the divine. Ned, the man who has built his entire life as an act of devotion, does not. You can read this as the show being cynical about religion, but the theory's most interesting version reads it differently. It reads it as the show making an observation about the difference between authentic relationship and performed virtue. Homer's encounter with God is authentic because Homer has not organized his relationship with the divine around the attempt to earn it. He is not trying to be good enough. He is just Homer. And God shows up in Homer's life because Homer is genuinely, imperfectly, fully present in it. Ned has tried so hard to be good enough that the genuine relationship has been crowded out by the performance of worthiness. He has replaced the real thing with the demonstration of the real thing. And the demonstration, however sincere, is not the same as the thing. In the grammar of the show's theology, Homer's chaos is closer to honest relationship with existence than Ned's order. This is not a comfortable observation. It is not one that resolves cleanly. But it is what the show is saying when it places these two men next door to each other for 35 years and shows you who God talks to. The final image of Ned Flanders that the theory settles on is not the one of him snapping in the hurricane aftermath. It is a quieter one. It is Ned in his living room. After Maud has been gone for years, the boys grown and largely absent, the house maintained with the same relentless care it always was. He is reading the Bible. The lamp is on. Through the window, you can see the light in Homer's house. Homer is probably watching something stupid on television. The laugh track is probably playing. The house is probably a gentle mess. And Ned sits with his Bible in the quiet house and the lamp is on and the night is very still. The theory does not tell us what Ned is feeling. It does not have to. The image carries it. Homer's intelligence the case for what was taken. The episode in which Homer has the crayon removed from his brain is one of the show's most structurally daring. It is an episode that asks what would happen if you took away the premise, if the defining limitation of the show's central character were briefly suspended, and the answer the show gives is both funnier and sadder than you might expect. Without the crayon, Homer is smart. Not vaguely smarter than usual smart. Genuinely, substantively, surprisingly intelligent. He reads books. He engages with ideas. He forms opinions about things he had previously been incapable of having opinions about. He goes to a film and understands it not just follows the plot, but actually understands what the film was trying to do and has thoughts about whether it succeeded. He writes a letter about nuclear safety that is, the show tells us, both accurate and eloquent enough to shut down the plant temporarily. This Homer, the Homer who lives behind the crayon, is recognizable as a version of someone who could have had a different life. Not a better life in every sense. The episode is careful about this. Smart Homer is, in some ways, miserable. He can see the world clearly enough to understand how badly it has gone wrong in certain specific ways that directly affect him. He can see the gap between what his life is and what it might have been. He can see Lisa's loneliness with an accuracy that he lacked before and cannot do anything more useful about with his new intelligence than he could without it. He asks Lisa to put the crayon back, and this is the moment the theory reaches for. Because Homer does not ask for the crayon to be put back because intelligence is painful in the abstract, he asks because intelligence, in Springfield, in his specific life, in the specific circumstances that have been constructed around him, is unbearable. The gap it reveals is too wide. The loneliness it produces of being the only person at the table who can see the table clearly is too specific a pain. The theory's most careful version notes that Homer's intelligence, in the episode where it is briefly activated, does not make him a different person. It makes him the same person, more awake. His love for his family does not change. His warmth does not change. His essential character generous, impulsive, hungry for connection, capable of both great foolishness and genuine tenderness, is all still there. The intelligence does not replace any of this. It adds to it. What it adds is perspective. And perspective, in Springfield, is the thing that cannot be sustained. This is what the theory understands about Homer, that the show's comedy sometimes obscures. He is not fundamentally a stupid man. He is a man whose intelligence has been suppressed, first by the crayon and whatever circumstances led to a childhood in which a crayon ended up in a brain, then by radiation, then by the decades of cognitive erosion that come from living in a contaminated environment. He is also a man who, once intelligence is briefly restored, chooses to suppress it again, but the choice is not made freely. It is made in a context that has been constructed over his entire lifetime to make intelligence unsustainable. To be smart in Springfield is to be isolated. To see clearly is to see the tire fire and the cooling towers and the yellow skin and the fish with 3 eyes, and to have no community of clear-eyed people to stand with. Lisa knows this. Lisa has been living this for her entire depicted life. Her intelligence is her greatest gift and the source of her deepest loneliness. Homer sees what Lisa's life looks like, and he chooses the fog. Not because the fog is better, because the fog is sustainable. This is, in the end, the most honest thing the show ever says about intelligence and community and the specific cost of seeing clearly in a place that has organized itself around not seeing. Homer's choice to be stupid is not stupidity. It is a rational response to an environment in which clarity is unaffordable. And the crayon goes back in. And Homer laughs at something. And he is not sure why he is laughing, and the family finds it charming. And Springfield continues. The weight of the couch gag. Every episode of The Simpsons opens the same way. The clouds, the town, the school bus, the nuclear plant, the grocery store, the family each coming from a different direction. The music, Danny Elfman's theme, one of the most recognizable pieces of television composition in the history of the medium. And then the house, and then the couch. The couch gag changes every week. This is well known. The couch gag is one of the show's most flexible creative spaces. It has been used for elaborate animation experiments, for guest director showcases, for comedic escalation, for surreal departures from the show's established visual vocabulary. It has been a platform for some of the most genuinely strange and beautiful animation the show has produced. But the couch itself does not change. The couch is always there. Whatever form the gag takes, whatever elaborate scenario the family has to navigate, whatever visual joke the animators have constructed around the act of sitting down the couch is the constant, the destination, the point toward which the family moves every week, regardless of what happens between the opening and the arrival. The theory about the couch gag is quiet and does not require much elaboration. It holds simply that the couch is the show's thesis statement, that everything else, the nuclear plant, the school, the bar, the neighbor's lawn, the adventures and disasters and resets, is the space between the family and the couch. And the show is, fundamentally, the story of the family finding its way back. Every week they are scattered. Every week they converge. Every week the couch catches them. This is what the dream is for. This is what the floating timeline preserves. This is what the radiation theory's cognitive damage cannot reach, and what the coma theory's gradual deterioration cannot erode. The family on the couch, the 5 of them together. Whatever shape the gag takes, whatever chaos precedes the landing, the couch receives them. Under the coma theory, this is the most literal image in the entire show. Homer is reaching for the couch. Every episode is Homer reaching for the couch. The place where the family is together. The place that is, in the grammar of his dreaming mind, what home means. The couch cannot be taken away because the couch is the reason the dream exists. And if Homer ever wakes up, if the dream ever ends, the last image, the image that fades out as consciousness returns, will probably be the couch, the family landing on it, the music swelling, the screen going dark, just for a moment longer, just another week. Springfield's economy and the invisible cage. There is one dimension of Springfield that the fan theories tend to touch on briefly without fully developing, and it is worth spending some time there before we close. The economics. Springfield's economy is organized around a small number of large employers and a scattering of small businesses that seem to persist despite being economically improbable. The Quick E-Mart, Moe's Tavern, the B-Sharps, briefly. Businesses that in any normal market analysis would not survive. maintained in the fabric of the town's life by some logic that has nothing to do with profit margins. The largest employer, by far, is the nuclear power plant. Mr. Burns's facility is the economic center of gravity for the entire community. It employs a significant percentage of the adult male population. It generates the electricity on which every other enterprise in the town depends. Its tax payments, such as they are, given Burns's considerable skill at avoiding obligations, contribute to the municipal infrastructure. Its presence, and the presence of the workers it employs, supports the restaurants and bars and shops and services that fill out the rest of Springfield's economic life. This means that everything in Springfield is ultimately downstream from Burns's decisions. The theory about Springfield's economy holds that this arrangement is not accidental and is not simply a feature of the town's history that persists through inertia. It holds that the arrangement is maintained actively, deliberately, because it serves Burns's interests to have a town that cannot afford to challenge him. A town that depends entirely on one employer for its economic survival is a town that cannot effectively regulate, challenge, or hold accountable that employer. The workers know this. The local government knows this. The residents who run small businesses that depend on the spending of plant workers know this. The knowledge is never explicitly articulated. It does not have to be. It operates as a background condition, a structural fact that shapes every decision without ever needing to be stated. When the question of nuclear safety violations arises, as it does repeatedly in the show's run, the town's response is always shaped by this background condition. The violations are real, the evidence is available, but the conclusion that the violations should be seriously addressed, with the kind of consequences that would follow for any less economically central facility, is a conclusion that the town's residents cannot quite reach, because reaching it would require looking directly at the implications. If the plant were shut down or significantly fined or subjected to genuine regulatory oversight, what would happen to Springfield? The economic modeling is not complex. It would be devastating. The businesses that serve plant workers would contract or close. Property values would fall. The municipal tax base would collapse. The services that Springfield's residents depend on, however imperfect those services are, would deteriorate further. The town would not just face a transition, it would face the specific kind of post-industrial collapse that has gutted dozens of real American communities. Burns knows this. He has always known this. It is, in the theory's most explicit version, the primary mechanism of his control. Not bribery, though there is bribery. Not corruption, though there is corruption. The primary mechanism is structural dependency. Springfield cannot move against Burns without moving against itself. And so Springfield does not move against Burns. The crayon in Homer's brain is one metaphor for this. The broader economic structure is the same metaphor at a larger scale. Homer cannot think his way out of his situation because the crayon prevents him. Springfield cannot act its way out of its situation because the economic structure prevents it. In both cases, the cage is invisible. In both cases, the person inside the cage has largely stopped noticing the bars. The theory extends this to ask whether Burns constructed the dependency deliberately or simply inherited and maintained it. The evidence is ambiguous. The plant existed before Burns made it what it is. The town's relationship with industrial employment predates his particular tenure. But Burns's choices, the decision not to bring the plant up to code, the decision to maintain Homer's employment as a guarantee of continued safety violations, the decision to use every available lever of political and economic power to prevent serious accountability are choices that have deepened and extended the dependency rather than allowing the town any path toward economic diversification. A town with a more diversified economy would be less controllable. Burns has not diversified Springfield's economy. He has let it calcify around his plant. Whether this is strategy or simply the natural expression of a man who has never, in his very long life, found it necessary to consider the interests of anyone other than himself, is a question the show does not definitively answer. But the effect is the same either way. Springfield is a company town. The company has no legal obligation to the town. The town has no real recourse against the company. And the residents, who understand this in the wordless way that people understand the conditions of their own captivity, have built their lives as best they can within the invisible walls, Homer included. Homer, especially, his life at the plant, the danger, the incompetence, the radiation, the fundamental absurdity of a man with his qualifications holding the position he holds is not an anomaly. It is the perfect expression of how company towns work. The workers are not employed because they are the best available candidates for the work. They are employed because they are available, and they will not make trouble. And the alternative unemployment in a town with no other economic options is worse. Homer knows this. He does not know that he knows this, but his body knows it. His compliance knows it. The way he accepts indignity after indignity from a man who cannot even remember his name, this is not stupidity. This is structural understanding expressed through behavior rather than language. He stays because leaving is not really an option. He endures because endurance is what the structure requires. And the dream, if the dream is what is happening, is the mind's attempt to find the dignity in this that the structure will not provide. The dream says, he is a good man. He loves his family. He comes home. He is more than what the plant makes of him. He is Homer Simpson, and the couch waits, and the family lands, and whatever Burns takes from him during the day, the evening gives it back. The economics of Springfield are the economics of captivity made comfortable enough to survive. And the comfort is real. The couch is real. The love is real, even in a company town. Even downstream of a man who has been alive for over 100 years and has never once considered whether the town he essentially owns might deserve better than what he has given it. The plant hums. The cooling towers steam. The town sleeps. And somewhere in a hospital bed or on a couch on Evergreen Terrace, Homer Simpson is already dreaming his way home. The final synthesis. What every theory shares. We have been in Springfield for a long time tonight. We have followed the nuclear runoff through the water supply and traced its path into yellow skin and bulging eyes and the particular cognitive fog that keeps Homer Simpson from connecting the dots that would, if connected, remake his understanding of his own life. We have sat with the coma theory with the possibility that everything since April 1993 is the dream of a man who is still, somewhere, lying very still in a hospital bed, generating these episodes from the raw material of everything he loved and everything he feared. We have reopened the file on the shooting of Mr. Burns and found it still full of contradictions that the official verdict doesn't resolve. We have traced the medical improbability of Burns's continued existence to its strange and logical conclusion. We have watched Springfield vote, unanimously, to make truth illegal. We have found Maggie in the corners of scenes she was not supposed to be important in, and discovered that she has been watching everything, remembering everything, waiting with the patience of someone who knows that the right moment has not yet arrived. We have examined the predictions and found in them not magic but sustained attention. We have followed Mona Simpson's trail from 1969 to her son's living room and back into hiding, and felt the weight of everything that trail left behind in the shape of one man's sadness. We have tried to locate Springfield on a map and found it everywhere and nowhere, which turns out to be exactly right. And we have looked at the floating timeline until it looked back. Here is what all of these theories share when you hold them together. Every theory about The Simpsons, when pushed to its conclusion, is a theory about what it costs to be ordinary, not dramatically ordinary. Not the subject of tragedy or the hero of a redemption arc or the central figure in a story about destiny. Just ordinary. The person who wakes up and goes to work and comes home and watches television and loves their family imperfectly and makes mistakes they do not fully learn from and keeps going anyway. The person for whom the scale of the life is not the scale of history, who does not change the world, who is not remembered beyond the people who knew them, whose struggles are real but not epic. Springfield is built for this person. The whole show is. Every episode is a document of the ordinary, of the way the ordinary is difficult, the way it conceals damage, the way it sustains love, the way it resists examination and rewards attention. The radiation theory is a theory about what ordinary life in an ordinary American town actually costs the body, what the hidden price of proximity to industrial power looks like when you stop averting your gaze. The coma theory is a theory about what ordinary love looks like to someone who might be losing it, about how ordinary love is, in fact, the most extraordinary thing a person can have. How a man lying in a hospital bed might spend whatever consciousness remains to him, dreaming not of adventure or glory or escape, but of his family, exactly as they are, preserved in the amber of a Tuesday evening in Springfield. The Burns immortality theory is a theory about what extraordinary wealth does to the ordinary people around it, how the concentration of power in one man's hands shapes the texture of everyone else's ordinary life, whether they can see it or not. The Mona theory is a theory about what ordinary family structures carry inside them, about how the damage done in one generation transmits to the next, not through dramatic betrayal, but through the ordinary gaps in ordinary lives, through the explanations not given, through the absences that become structural features of a child's developing sense of themselves. The Maggie theory is a theory about what ordinary silence costs, about what it looks like to be extraordinary, in a context that will punish the expression of that extraordinariness, and to make the rational choice to wait rather than to speak. The prediction theory is a theory about what ordinary attention, applied carefully and consistently over time, can see that more spectacular kinds of intelligence miss. And the floating timeline theory is a theory about what ordinary life would look like if it were allowed to persist indefinitely. If the kids stayed kids and the parents stayed young and the house stayed exactly as it was on the day, you left for the last time and nothing was ever finished. And nothing was ever lost. These are all the same theory. The Simpsons is a show about the value of the ordinary, about the specific gravity of ordinary love, about the specific damage done when ordinary lives are subjected to forces that do not see them as lives at all, only as variables, as resources, as collateral. About the specific courage it takes to keep going, to keep choosing the family over the escape, to keep showing up for the people who need you, even when showing up means walking back into a life that is imperfect in ways you cannot quite name. Homer Simpson is not an eloquent man. He does not have the language for the things he carries. The crayon, the radiation, the dream, none of these gave him the words. But he keeps showing up. Every episode, he comes home. Every episode, the couch catches them. Every episode, the family lands together, and the music plays, and the screen goes dark. That is the synthesis. That is what all 35 years of theories are circling. The weight of the ordinary. The value of the life that does not look like much from the outside but contains, inside it, the whole of a person's love. Springfield is still out there. The plant is still running. The tire fire is still burning. Hans Moleman is probably fine. Ned's lamp is on. Maggie is watching. And Homer is on his way home. He is always on his way home. A final note before sleep. There is something specific about falling asleep to the theories about The Simpsons that is worth naming directly before we go. The show is, in its bones, a show about comfort. Not the comfort of things being easy or fair, not the comfort of problems being solved, but the comfort of continuity. Of the same family on the same couch. Of the same opening credits, the same music, the same Homer and the car and the garage, the same family converging from different directions to land on the same piece of furniture at the end of the day. That specific comfort, the comfort of reliable return, of the thing that is always there when you come back to it, is not a minor thing. It is not a trivial offering. It is, for a lot of people who grew up with this show, one of the first things they understood about what it feels like to have something you can come home to. The theories exist because some people loved the show enough to look past its surface, because the comfort it offered was rich enough that they wanted to understand where it came from. And what they found, when they looked, was that the comfort was not accidental. It was built. It was built out of specific choices about character and world, and the particular way that ordinary suffering could be rendered in animated yellow form and offered to an audience that would recognize it. The theories are love letters. Every elaborate argument about radiation poisoning and coma dreams and institutional surveillance is, at some level, a way of saying, this show mattered enough to think about this hard. This show contained enough to justify this level of attention. This family, even fictional, even animated, even perpetually 35 and yellow and slightly wrong in every possible way, was worth caring about. That is, in the end, the answer to the question the video began with. Why can't we let them go? Because they are the family we come home to. Because Bart has been 10 years old since before many of us can remember being any age at all. Because the couch is always there. Because Homer keeps showing up, keeps trying, keeps failing in specific and recognizable ways that make us feel less alone in our own specific and recognizable failures. Because the dream is a good dream, even the sad parts of it, even the dark parts, even the parts that when examined closely, reveal damage and systemic cruelty and the weight of generations. The dream is still a dream of love. And love, even in Springfield, even in a town that cannot be located on a map, even in a show that has been running for 35 years longer than physics should permit, even in the mind of a man lying still in a hospital bed, generating these episodes from whatever remains of his waking life. Love is still what holds it all together. The couch, the family, the music, home, sleep well. One last thing. The theories in this video are not the show's official interpretation of itself. They are what happens when an audience loves something enough to live inside it, to carry it with them, to return to it, to ask it questions it was not designed to answer. The Simpsons was never meant to be a mystery. It was meant to be a comedy, a family comedy, specifically with an edge of satire and a warmth that made the edge bearable. It was meant to make Sunday evenings feel a little more human, to take the specific textures of ordinary American life and render them in yellow, four-fingered, slightly radioactive form, and hold them up to the light and say, "Look, this is what it looks like. This is what we are." The theories emerged because the show was good enough, dense enough, human enough to sustain them. You cannot build a 35-year conspiracy theory around a piece of disposable entertainment. You can only build it around something that was worth paying attention to. Every person who sat down and mapped Springfield's geography, who traced the timeline of the coma theory across seasons, who collected the evidence around Maggie's impossible intelligence, who followed the thread of Mona Simpson's disappearance back to its origin in a germ warfare lab in 1969, every one of those people was, in their own specific way, paying the show a compliment. They were saying it mattered. And it did. It does. The couch, the family, the dream that never ends. Sleep well. There is a specific kind of tiredness that comes from thinking carefully about something you love. Not exhaustion, something warmer than that. The tiredness of having paid full attention, of having gone all the way to the bottom of a subject and found, at the bottom, that the subject had more in it than you expected. That the yellow cartoon family in the yellow cartoon town was carrying more weight than a comedy is supposed to carry, and had been carrying it quietly for decades without complaint. That is the tiredness you should feel right now, if the night has gone the way it was meant to go. The satisfying heaviness of having sat with something serious for a while. Of having followed the theories all the way from the cooling towers and the three-eyed fish to the couch gag and the closing music. Of having spent time in Springfield in the dark and come out the other side with something you didn't have before. The show is still running. It will probably always be running. Bart will always be 10. The plant will always be humming. The tire fire will always be burning at the edge of town, that familiar orange glow against the dark sky of a place that doesn't exist on any map and somehow exists exactly where you are. Sleep well. Springfield will be here when you come back. It always is.